What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Marvel as Doctor Doom? Part 3. If you enjoy this type of content, please, if you see the like button, gently sledgehammer him. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the rise of the Bringer of Doom. September 27, 2007, Mexico City, Mexico. Third person, POV. As she walked through Alameda Central Park, Natasha Romanoff surveyed her surroundings, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Insert image of Natasha Romanoff / Black Widow here, but she couldn't find it. Though that didn't mean it wasn't there. Which is why Natasha was certainly not dropping her guard. In fact, she never did when engaging in a mission. Because it's what kept her alive to take another one. After walking a bit more, Natasha found the location where she had been instructed to meet her client for this job. A park bench. One that was off the main paths, but still close enough to them for people passing by to see its location. The park bench was also surrounded by trees on all sides, which would make it almost impossible for a sniper to take out anyone seated on it. Seeing this setup, Natasha had to give a hand to her upcoming client. She could tell they were an experienced operative, or had been in the game for a while. Though this realization only made her even more wary than she already was. Honestly, Natasha's training and instincts were telling her not to take this job the moment it was offered to her. But the payout was just too much for her to pass up on. So she ignored the voice in the back of her head, and now here she is. Walking over to the park bench, Natasha took a seat on it. Then she began to wait for the client, as instructed. Though Natasha only had to wait a moment before someone sat down on the bench next to her. The person in question then spoke. Natasha Romanoff, likely the most famous Black Widow alive. How I have been waiting to meet you. A male voice said to her. The second after they finished, Natasha whipped her head to look at them, finding herself staring at someone she never expected to see here. The king of an Eastern European nation who had been making big waves across the entire world in the past couple of years. Victor Werner von Doom. What's the matter? Something on my face? Victor asked as Natasha continued staring at him. No. Natasha replied. Victor noticing her entire body tense up as she did. Ms. Romanoff, there is no need to be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. Victor spoke. I simply want to talk about a few things. And what might those things be? Natasha asked. Oh, just about the Red Room, the Black Widow program as a whole. And a certain Gen Dash. Before Victor could say any more, Natasha pulled a hidden knife from her left sleeve and moved towards him, intending to slit his throat wide open. But all of a sudden, Natasha found herself stopped in her tracks. And no matter how much she tried to move, she couldn't. Now, Ms. Romanoff, that's not very nice. Victor spoke, berating Natasha like a child. You shouldn't play with sharp objects. You could hurt yourself or others. And on another note, if you were likely anyone else, you would be dead, right? He said, the smile dropping from Victor's face. Seeing this, Natasha instantly noticed his change in demeanor, and just looking at it made her feel fear, telling her she had messed up in a big way. As Victor continued staring at her, Natasha suddenly death the cold of touch. But then as quickly as the touch happened, it was over. Well, it's not like I can really blame you for reacting the way you did, given the subjects I mentioned are near and dear to your heart. Victor said, he having removed his gaze from her. When this happened, Natasha released an enormous amount of tension from her body she didn't even notice she had until then. Just who is Victor von Doom? Natasha thought, since he was not like any other ruler she had ever met. While she began pondering her own question, Natasha suddenly stopped when she noticed the knife she was holding slip out of her grasp and begin hovering in the air, right in front of Victor. The same thing then began happening with all the other weapons she had hidden on her person. One by one they came out from their hiding places and moved to hover in front of Victor, leaving Natasha absolutely stunned. What? She exclaimed. This being the first time in a long time she had been truly shocked by anything. How are you doing that? Natasha couldn't help but ask. She also wondered why the people she noticed walking by weren't seeming to pay any attention to what was going on with her and Victor. Telekinesis. Victor easily replied. Quite the handy ability, he said. And might I just say you are quite impressive storing so many weapons on your person at once. Having counted 20 in all. Natasha didn't know how to respond to this. Since none of her training, nor any other experience up until now, could compare to right now. Well then, enough with the pleasantries. Let's get down to business. Victor spoke. Placing his left elbow stopped the park bench. The reason I worked to arrange this little meeting between us, Natasha, is because I want to offer you a job. But more than that, I want to offer you a chance. A chance to take back everything that was taken from you by the Black Widow program, the Red Room, and General Dreykov. He explained, looking her dead in the eyes. Natasha getting a shiver across her entire body due to this. Since it felt like Victor was staring directly into her soul. But despite that, she worked to keep her reasoning intact. You must really want to die, huh? Natasha mused. Taking about such things in public. Oh, don't worry. No one is paying any attention to us at the moment. Victor said. Thanks to the magic barriers I put up which cover a 3-meter radius, 9 feet, around us. To the outside world, the two of us right now just look like we're having a normal and pleasant chat. Which is essentially what we're doing anyway. So in a sense what they're seeing is not technically a lie. He spoke. Wait. Magic. Magic is real. Natasha said. Yes. Victor replied. But let's not get off topic. He said. Now, as I was saying, if you come and work for me, I'll not only help you destroy the Red Room, but let you have your fill of vengeance against Dreykov, restore your ability to someday become a mother, and help you rescue your fellow widows. Including your sister, Yelena. Don't you dare say her name. Natasha shouted. But Victor ignored it. Given what he knew thanks to his meta-knowledge. So he waited for Natasha to calm down. Then once she did, he resumed speaking. So, what do you think of my offer? Victor asked. I think it's bullshit. Natasha sharply replied. And even if it isn't, why are you offering it to me? Seeing as how you already know so much, you definitely know the things I've done. I've got so much blood on my hands. So why me, huh? Why me? Tell me why. She shouted. Natasha not even noticing she was beginning to cry. But even when she could, since she was still frozen in place, courtesy of Victor telekinesis, she couldn't even wipe away her tears. So instead she was stuck there crying. Until suddenly Natasha felt herself able to move again. Wipe your tears. Victor said. Handing her a handkerchief he had taken out of his pocket. Looking at it, then looking at Victor, Natasha thought about it for a moment before making her decision. Gently, she reached out and took the handkerchief, and then began using it to wipe away her tears. Once Natasha was done, she attempted to hand it back to Victor, only for him to raise his hand up and deny it. You keep it, he said. And as for your earlier question of why I am offering you this deal instead of any of the other widows out there, it's because I know you so well. I know what you've been through, and how much you've suffered. But despite all that, you've never completely given up hope or given in to despair. That is a trait I admire in you, Natasha Romanoff. And I know this deal sounds like bullshit, but believe me when I say I can make it happen. Victor spoke. So I ask you again, will you accept my offer? Hearing Victor's earlier question again, Natasha quickly thought through all her options, the pros and cons, and eventually came to a final decision on the matter. I do accept your offer. Natasha spoke. She of course knew it was crazy to do so, relying on a man she had just met. But something inside her told her to. So on this, the Black Widow was going to trust her instincts. Okay then, Victor said, letting a smile from on his face. He then offered his hand to Natasha, which he took and shook. For Victor, this meant she was formally entering his employ. A joyous day for him. Since now he not only had one of the deadliest femme fatale/spies in all of Marvel working for him, but he could now ogle Scarlett Johansson as much as he wanted. Since Natasha looked exactly like her. So in this matter, Victor didn't lose anything at all. Making it a great day for Dr. Doom. September 29, 2007, Latveria, Doomstadt, Victor POV. Exiting the Gulfstream G150, I started heading towards the SUV that would take me home to Castle Doom. Natasha following right behind me. After she agreed to the deal I offered her, we immediately left Mexico and made a beeline towards Latveria. Having arrived without any issues. As I got closer to the vehicle, one of the security personnel opened the rear door for me, and I slipped on first. Natasha then coming in right after me. Once inside of the vehicle, the door was then closed. It then a quick trip from the airfield to my home. As we got out of the vehicle, Natasha examined Castle Doom with her gaze. Huh, so you really do live in a castle? Of course. Doesn't most royalty? I said. From what I've seen, it's usually 50-50ths. Natasha explained. Plus most of the royalty that do live in castles usually live in ones much larger than this. No offense. None taken. I replied. And on another note, those castles of other royals having nothing on mine. I said. Right. I'll believe it when I see it. Natasha said. I'll hold you to that. I replied. The two of us then entered into the castle, where we found the entire castle staff, Boris, Christoph, Lucia, Zora, and Zemo waiting for us. Father, welcome back. Christoph said as he walked up to me and gave me a hug. One which I reciprocated. You have a kid? Natasha questioned. Yes. I replied. Christoph, introduce yourself to Natasha. Okay. He said. Christoph then walked up to Natasha and looked her straight in her eyes. Greetings, I am Christoph Bernard Doom. It's a pleasure to meet you. He said. You too. Natasha replied. Once she did, Christoph returned to Boris' side, and after exchanging pleasantries with him, and introducing Natasha to the castle staff, they all left, leaving Natasha and I alone with Zora, Lucia, and Zemo. So where's Christoph's mother, if you don't mind me asking? Natasha asked me. She passed. I replied. I see. Sorry. Natasha said. Thank you. I told her. It must be hard with her gone. Natasha spoke. Yeah, it's hard for Christoph every day. I said. When I did, Natasha gave me a weird look. I then realized why. Oh, Christoph isn't my biological son. I adopted him. Though in my eyes he's my son in every way that counts. I quickly explained. Oh, I see. Natasha replied. Yes. I spoke. Now then, on to introductions. Natasha, I would like you to meet Latveria Prime Minister, Lucia von Bardas, our Minister of Defense Zora Vukovic, and finally one of our generals Helmut Jabe Zemo. I spoke, pointing to each one as I called their names. Once I finished, they and Natasha exchanged brief greetings. After they did, I had Zemo take charge of Natasha, Lucia, Zora, and I then split up with them. While we walked, Zora spoke up. My king, is it wise to give Romanov such freedom of movement? It's fine, Zora. I replied. She accepted my deal because she wants to change from what she was made into. Besides, who do you think you're talking to? Because I'm not foolish enough to trust Black Widow just like that. Right now I have her under surveillance, and if she makes one move I don't like, then, well, let's just hope she doesn't. My point is, Zora knows how cautious I am, yet she still asked me such a question. That's not like her at all. So to see what the issue was, I scanned her surface thoughts and emotions, finding something I didn't expect. Jealousy. Zora was jealous of Natasha. She's also a little jealous of Sable. But mostly she's jealous of Lucia. Not only because I have given her powers, but also because she alone is getting a dose of my vitamin D, which Zora has never gotten. Well, seems I'll have to rectify that. Especially if she's gotten this jealous. Though I must admit it's kind of cute. Yes, you're right. Forgive me, my king. I just wanted some reassurance, considering the background of the person you've recruited this time. Zora said. Completely understandable, Zora. I replied. So, since Zemo is back, I take it his mission was successful? Yes. It was. Zora answered. Otto Vermis has been successfully eliminated, and we were also able to rescue the woman known as Jessica Drew you informed us about. She explained. Good. I said. Also keep her as she currently is until I can attend to her. I ordered the two of them. Jessica's current situation being her in a medically induced coma, which she will stay in until I can get around to her and remove all the brainwashing Hydra began putting in her head to make her loyal to them. So I can then implant my own information and make her loyal to me and Latveria, since her talents would be wasted by Hydra and by extension S.H.I.E.L.D. Yes, my king. Both Zora and Lucia immediately replied. After they did so, we walked the rest of our way to our destination in a comfortable silence. which was the state-of-the-art medical lab I had built in one of the castle sub-basement catacombs. Entering, we found Sarah and Maya waiting for us. "Ladies," I said to them. "Good to see you both." "The same to you, King Victor," Dr. Kinney replied. "Yes, the same," Dr. Hansen added. "How have you both been? Everything going well?" I asked them. "Everything is fine," Maya said. "Yes, everything is well," Sarah spoke. "And Laura is truly enjoying school." "Same goes for Riri," Maya spoke. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. Truly I am. Now then, let's get this show on the road," I said. I then walked over to one of the medical beds and sat on it. I then removed my shirt without any hesitation, not even trying to keep a smirk from forming on my face as all the ladies in the room started staring at me like a piece of meat. "See something you like, ladies?" I asked them. "I certainly do," Zora said without any shame. "Same for me," Lucia added, licking her lips. Ahem, Maya faked coughed. "Before you three start humping each other like rabbits, can we please do what we came here to do?" she said. "Right. Business first before pleasure," I said. "Let's get to it then," I spoke. "Yes," Dr. Kinney spoke. She then walked over to a small cart and wheeled it over to me. Once she did, she picked up the only object sitting on it, a syringe filled with a dark red liquid. The liquid itself being a formula I synthesized from the genetically engineered spiders that Richard Parker created, after I obtained his DNA and broke the genetic lock he placed upon them. Since I have plans to give several individual spider-based powers, myself included as you can see, and with that being the case, I didn't want each person I wanted to bestow these powers upon to have to get bitten by one of the radioactive spiders in my possession, and suffer through the same stuff Peter Parker goes through almost every time when he obtains his powers. A serum is much simpler. So I made one. Me about to be its first human test subject. Which is why both Dr. Kinney and Dr. Hansen are present right now. Since even though I have run dozens of simulations and calculations about how the spider serum will interact with my already enhanced physiology, I truly don't know what will happen. Which is why I have two of the best medical professionals I know, who also have experience in dealing with enhanced individuals, here in front of me. Just in case shit hits the fan. Stepping up to me, Dr. Kinney found a vein on my arm. Once she did, she injected the spider serum into me, then stepped back. After she did so, we waited for the serum to take effect, which it did seconds after Sarah injected me with it. Feeling dry mouth and my internal temperature start to rise, I lied down on the table. Maya and Sarah moving closer to monitor my condition, which stayed exactly the same for 5 minutes before I felt myself return to normal. Once I did, I jumped to my feet, then slipped my shirt back on. "So, did it work?" Maya asked. In response to her question, I leapt straight up, managing to reach the ceiling, touch it with both my hands, and then simply hung in the air as my hands basically stayed glued to it. "Yes, I think it worked," I replied. I then dropped back down to the floor, feeling no pain whatsoever in my body from the action. "Looks like the serum was a success," I spoke. "For now, I am Spider Doom." After making sure this was true, I sent Sarah, Maya, and Lucia on their way, but asked Zora to remain behind. Standing in front of me, she had her hands clasped behind her back. "Yes, my king?" she asked. "You know there's no reason for you to be jealous, right?" I spoke. "I'm sorry, my king, I do not know what you are dash." Before Zora could continue spotting her lies, I closed the distance between us, forces her back in the wall, then slammed my left hand against the wall near her head. "Victor, what are you doing?" Zora asked. "Just letting you know that I haven't forgotten about you at all, my dear," I said, looking Zora in her eyes. "All I need is a little more time and you will have your own powers, I promise. And until then, here's a little something to tide you over while you wait," I spoke. I then leaned down and captured Zora's lips with my own, giving her a small taste of what's to come. But only after I've given her her powers. Since the way my body is right now, if Zora and I went at it, I would cause her death by SNU. Using my tongue, I dominated Zora's, making her moan. Then after a few moments, I broke our kiss, leaving Zora panting. "So, do we have an understanding?" I asked. "We do, my king," Zora replied. "And thank you for the gift just now." "Well, it's only a taste of what's to come," I replied. I then gave her rear cheeks a little squeeze. Zora entire body shuddering in response. telling me my business with her was concluded. So upon seeing this, I opened the door and the two of us went out separate ways. Me heading straight for the dungeons. Arriving, I headed straight for a cell, where I found two Doombots safeguarding a stunningly beautiful woman lying on a medical bed, hooked up to an 4, as well as machines that were monitoring her vitals. The woman in question being none other than Jessica Drew/Spider-Woman. Insert image of Jessica Drew/Spider-Woman here. Just looking at her, I couldn't help but feel the flag in my pants start to rise a bit. Damn. Why do all women in comic book universes have to be so hot? I thought to myself, while also quickly squashing my lustful urges. Since it's like I said earlier, business before pleasure. Seeing me, the two Doombots opened up the cell. Once they did, I stepped inside. Then I got straight to work turning Jessica Drew into a loyal follower of Latveria, but more importantly Victor Von Doom, also known as me. February 14, 2008. As the chemical synthesizer in front of me finished running its course, I stood up from my seat and walked over to it. I then collected the vials I had placed inside of it earlier, each one of them filled with a pure golden liquid. The liquid being my latest personally created serum, which name is the Ambrosia Serum. A serum I created combing the data and other research material from Extremis, the Super Soldier Serum, and GR27, which, if my calculations are correct, and I know they are, will give anyone who takes it increased vitality and stamina, extend their lifespan by at least 3 times its natural length, cure any diseases they may have, genetic or otherwise, and make them immune to toxins, poisons, etc. Though it won't give anyone superpowers. Oh no. I am not that irresponsible. No, this serum is for ordinary people. Namely the citizens of my country for now, and in the future my entire domain, which will be the entire world. But again for now, just my citizens and especially those closest to me. Like Boris. Since the man is already 69 and I don't intend to lose him after just getting him back in my life. Taking the vials, I placed them on a vial rack. I then placed them in the room's laboratory freezer before exiting it. Stepping into the main area of my newly built personal lab. One which is housed inside of a pocket dimension I created myself near the end of last year. Since that is the time I decided to pull my new lab. Because with the kind of ideas and plans I have rolling around in my head, I needed a bigger, and even more secure space to work and bring those ideas and plans to fruition and reality. So bossman, looks like the Ambrosia Serum can be crossed off the to-do list. That voice being another one of the ideas I wanted to bring to fruition and make a reality. Well, not the voice itself, but the being it belongs to. My personally created artificial intelligence, who is my assistant/friend. His name being Brainiac. Yes, Brainiac. Though unlike the being he is named after, which I can do since DC Comics doesn't exist in this universe, he is not a homicidal AI whose goal is to wipe out all life in the universe. Wait, scratch that. He is homicidal. But only to my enemies. For he is completely loyal to me. I made sure of it during his creation process. Since I did not want to deal with a Skynet or Ultron situation. And I know, it's dangerous to create an AI. But I don't really care since I wanted one. Not to mention all the best characters in fiction generally have an AI/robotic companion. Master Chief had Cortana in Halo. In Mass Effect Shepard has EDI. In Star Wars the Skywalker family has R2-D2 and C-3PO. Tony Stark has Jarvis. And my boy Revan has -47 Hong Kong dollars. Even that walking disaster Richards created Herbie for the F4. So yeah. No regrets on creating Brainiac, who I made to sound exactly like Machine Head from the Invink cartoon, which sadly also doesn't exist here. Oh well. Have to today the good with the bad. That is can Brainiac, that is can. I replied, walking to my main office and taking a seat behind my desk. I then leaned back in it. Now then, give me an update on your progress. I told him. Ever since he came online, I've assigned Brainiac to several projects I needed to get done, given he has the capability to complete them. Understood. He replied. First off, our satellites have finally pinpointed the location of one of the places on the list of high-priority targets you have gave me. The Savage Land. He spoke, bringing a smile to my face. Since now I finally have confirmation it exists here, meaning I can now acquire Antarctic Vibranian or Vibranian B. But with the Savage Land's existence, it also means that Bastard Sauron might exist here too, which I don't need. So if I encounter him, I'll make sure he goes permanently existence. Oh, and speaking of extinct, I can't wait to see the Savage Land's real-life dinosaurs. I can't wait to experience a version of Jurassic Park, which thankfully does exist here. Also, with regard to the satellites Brainiac mentioned, Latveria launched their own last month at the beginning of January. Since I, and by extension my nation, needed its own eyes on the sky. Excellent, I replied. Continue. Second, I've pinpointed the location of the Inhumans on the moon. But no matter how many times I've attempted to contact them, I've just been given the cold shoulder. Radio silence. The bastards. Brainiac spat. Now, Brainiac, there's no need for that. Perhaps the Inhumans aren't responding to your signals simply because they can't. I said. Though I'm sure you've activated the security protocols in case that's not what's going. Because I am not yet prepared to deal with the Inhumans in a head-on confrontation right now. Especially if they are more in line with their comic book versions than their MCU versions. Black Bolt and Maximus likely to be the most troublesome if that is indeed the case. No, I need more time before I am ready to fight them. Which of course I don't wish to do. But with what I have planned, I'm not holding out hope violence can be avoided. Since there can only be one king of Earth and the old system, and that man is I Doom. Of course, boss. Who do you think I am? C-3PO. Brainiac retorted. Me having shown in Star Wars. The two of us shared a laugh. We then focused back on the business at hand. Next up on the agenda, I've managed to track down Eric Stevens. Along with Dr. Tony Ho, and even Lorna Dane. Brainiac revealed. Good. I said like Palpatine. Keep monitoring them for now, and alert me to any sudden changes in their movements. Yes, sir. Brainiac replied. Once he did, the two of us discussed a few more things before we ended our conversation. After we did, I left my office and headed to one of the different labs inside of it. Arriving, I moved over to a laboratory freezer and retrieved a dark green vial from it, along with a medical injection gun. Loading the vial into the chamber of the gun, I then left that particular lab and walked to the portal located at the center of my lab. Coming to a stop in front of it, magic runes began glowing along the portal before it activated. Once it did, I walked through, arriving in what used to be my lab inside of the Castle Doom, where another portal machine was sitting, guarded by several Doombots. Since it is the entrance to my personal lab, though even if someone did defeat all the Doombots protecting the portal machine, they wouldn't be able to activate it. Since the machine won't activate unless a person enters their unique magical signature into its systems. So simply put, unless one knows both science and magic on my level, or I allow them access, they are not getting into my lab. Save for Brainiac. Since that's where his servers are stored. But since he would never betray me, things are all good. The Doombots in the room took notice of me for a second before returning to their guard duties. As they did, I exited the room I was in and headed out to one of Castle Medical Lab, where Zora was waiting for me. Zora, glad to see you, I said. Oh, and happy Valentine's Day, I told her. Thank you, Victor, she replied. So what is the reason you asked me to meet you here? She asked. To keep the promise I made to you a few months ago, I said, holding up the medical injection gun for her to see. Today is the day you get your powers, I told her. Truly? Zora asked. Yes, I replied. Now then, take off your shirt, I told her. Zora then, without any hesitation, took off her shirt. Once she did, I stepped up to her, placed the tip of the gun against her left arm, and then pulled the trigger, injecting the green serum into her body. The green serum in question being a combination of GR27 and a perfected goblin formula. So whoever I inject with this formula doesn't end up like Jack Torrance from The Shining of the Green Goblins themselves, which haven't appeared yet in this world, and I'll see that none of them ever do. Because if I even see one hint of any goblin, my butt is going to become the Goblin Slayer faster than those bastards can blink. But back to my main point. The new serum I created combing those two will not only give its taker superhuman physical capabilities, but decelerate their aging process, give them full disease immunity, and also unlock their genetic potential. By that I mean it will give them other superhuman abilities along the lines of flight, invisibility, etc. Though it's completely random. Put simply, I made my own version of Compound V from the boys, though mine works on adults. However, I can't call it Compound V since the boys is a thing in this reality. Thankfully. As the serum vial emptied, I took a few steps back from Zora, ready to jump in should anything crazy happen. So, how do you feel? I asked her. Good. She replied, clenching and unclenching her hands. Stronger, faster, bet wow. Zora suddenly exclaimed. But I can't blame her, since she just started levitating into the air. So self-propelled flight, huh? I thought. Victor, I'm flying. Zora said. Yes. I can see that. I replied. Haha. This is amazing. Zora said, a happy smile on her face as she did several loops in the air. She continued doing so for a while before landing back on the ground, where Zora's hands started sparking with electrical energy, along with her eyes. Zora. I spoke. I'm good, Victor. So good. Zora said, a grin on her face as she worked to control her electrical-based powers. Seeing this, I couldn't but put a wry smile on my face. Since my first test of my personal version of Compound V turned Zora into a version of Stormfront. But you know, without being a Nazi. So that's just fine with me. Once Zora calmed down again, we did a few medical tests, and I got a sample of her blood to study, which took us no time at all. Okay. Well, that takes care of all the business. I spoke. Now then, time for pleasure. I said. I then pulled Zora close and stuck my tongue down her throat. Her wrapping her arms around me, she pushed herself deeper into our kiss, until I broke it, leaving her panting. Victor, what's with the sudden kiss? She asked. Well, my dear Zora, not only do you now have your superhuman powers, but today is also Valentine's Day. And since all our work is now done, it's time I give you the gift you've been wanting for ages. I said, shoving my crotch into hers. Zora's entire body shivering as I did. Because it's finally time she gets a dose of vitamin D. It's time for SNU. Scooping Zora up princess style in my arms, I opened a portal straight to my bedroom and stepped through it. After doing so, I tossed Zora onto my bed. I then closed the portal and activated all the silencing spells within my room, along some proximity spells to alert Zora and I if anyone approaches. Because once we begin shadowinking, I have no doubt we won't notice anything else but the pleasure we're going to give to each other. Which is why shadowinking is the best. It's also a great way to exercise. Moving on. Slurp 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 slurping sounds filled the air as Zora greedily gobbled down my schlong. Me giving her head a gentle pat as she did a job pleasuring me. Yes, that's a good bitch. I told her. Which made her suck even tighter than she already was. Leading me to count, for the 30th time, ever since Zora and I started our Valentine Day Shaboink Marathon. Which neither of us are eager to end, nor have to thanks to our enhanced abilities. Yet another reason superpowers are awesome. Thank you, Master, she said. Zora having turned into a full submissive and slight masochist in the bedroom now. Which I am loving. No problem. I spoke. Especially since you have remembered your place. I told her, giving her another head pat. Her flash getting flush in response. Seeing this made me harder once again. So once I picked up Zora and carried her over to the desk. A look of surprise appearing on her face when I did. Victor, what are you doing? She asked. Just giving the bed a much-needed rest from the two of us. I said. Since we've been using it all night long. Placing Zora's face in the direction of the desk, I placed her left leg over my left shoulder. Gah. That is, until I heard a scream, which caused me to stop moving. Once I did, I looked in the direction the scream came from. Zora following suit. The two of us soon finding ourselves staring at none other than Jessica Drew, who is now my personal assistant / bodyguard, even though I don't truly need one. But Zora, Lucia, and pretty much all my closest advisors suggested I get one, so I could have someone watching my back at all times. So after listening to them, and thinking about myself, I agreed to the proposal, selecting Jessica to fill the position. Seeing as how, she had nothing else to do. Plus I know she will never betray Latveria or me considering what I did to her mind. So yeah, she was the perfect choice. Plus she's great eye candy. And it truly never hurts to have that around. Silence filled my room as Jessica continued staring at Zora and me, the two of us staring right back at her. Watching as the woman stuttered. Trying to find words to speak, but none coming out. I also couldn't help but notice she kept glancing at my crotch. And I sensed thoughts of arousal beginning to fill her head. When I did, I smirked. Why, Jessica, see something you like? Yes. I mean no. I mean ha. She quickly spoke. her face going bright red. "Victor," Zora said. Okay, no teasing right now." "I got it," I said. "Now seriously, Jessica, what is the reason you barged into my room and disturbed Zora and I? Is there an emergency?" "Sort of," she replied. "The briefing you scheduled for today is about to start and you and Minister Vukovic aren't there," Jessica replied. "What are you talking about, Jessica?" I asked her. "The briefing isn't scheduled until the morning of the 16th, I said. "But today is the 15th. AM, my king, today is the 16th. Jessica spoke. When she did, I looked at her for a few more seconds before Zora and I then shared a curious look. Both of us definitely wondering if we really had been smashing for a day and a half without even realizing it. Well, there's one way to find out. "Brainiac, is today truly February 16th? I asked him. Since although his servers are located in my pocket dimension lab, he's connected to the outside world, especially in Latveria and all throughout Castle Doom. "It sure is, Victor," Brainiac immediately replied. "Boy, you and Minister Vukovic sure have been going at it." He spoke. "I see. Thank you," I replied. "No problem," he said. Once he did, I turned my attention back to Jessica. "Well, thank you for coming to get us, Jessica. Now then, if you'll excuse us, Minister Vukovic and I have to prepare for the briefing," I said, slipping out of Zora. Jessica gaze immediately going to my schlong. Yeah, she definitely wants some vitamin D. Opening the doors to find the conference room we were using for the briefing, I entered it. Jessica and Zora trailing behind me. After Jessica came and informed us of the situation, Zora and I really did get ready. Now here we are. As the doors to the room closed behind us, Zora and I took our seat at the circular table in the middle of it. Jessica taking up a standing position behind me, where everyone else who was a part of this meeting was already seated and waiting. Those people being Lucia, Boris, Torvald, Zemo, Dens, who is now a general in the Latverian army, and finally the head of our nation's newest intelligence/assassination organization, which is known as Irenes, Natasha Romanoff. Natasha now fully invested with me and mine. Seeing as how I kept all my promises to her, we helped her save her fellow widows, including her sister Yelena, all of whom are now citizens of Latveria, most of whom are now serving in Irenes, and those that aren't have been set up nicely within my country border. She was able to get her revenge against Drakov, who was put through hell on earth before being sent to actual hell. I restored her and her fellow widows' ability to have children biologically. Not to mention for Natasha and all those within Irenes I made into EVOs, bestowing them all spider powers. Using the serum I created from the second spider I acquired from Oscorp a few years ago, which ended up giving Natasha and her sisters the powers of Miles Morales, my favorite spider person in all of Marvel. So yeah, everything is good. Okay, now that we're all here, let's start the briefing, I spoke. Before that, I would like to know what took you two so long to get here, Torvald asked. Zora and I were having a very intimate moment in my bedroom. I spoke without shame, one which I will not share the details of, since I am not a man who kisses and tells. Now then, any more questions? Oh, and before I forget, yesterday, I turned Zora into an EVO. Really, what are your powers? Natasha asked. After the briefing, all will be explained, I spoke. Once I did, the briefing truly began, it finishing up in no time at all. Once it did, Zora began explained her powers, after which I formally introduced everyone to the ambrosia serum, us having discussed it during the briefing, and gave a shot of it to Boris, Torvald, and Dens. Amazing, Boris spoke, doing jumping backs, a smile on his face. I feel like a man in my 20s again. Well, physically and biologically you are, I replied. Oh, thank you for this, Victor, Boris spoke. Yes, thank you, my king, Dens said. What they said, Torvald added. Do not mention it, I spoke. It was my pleasure to gift this all to you. Just as it will be to gift it to all of Latveria citizens, I said, us having discussed a plan to do so during the briefing. Once that was over, we went our separate ways, getting the day off to a great start. February 20th, 2008, New York City. Looking at Jessica, I couldn't help but lightly chuckle as she looked out her window with a super curious expression on her face, exactly like a child would. Then again, considering how she spent basically her entire childhood and formative years locked away in a variant of a medically induced coma, I can understand her wonderment. Especially since this is her first time seeing New York City in person. The place had the exact same effect on me when I visited it the first time in my previous life. Actually, it still has a little bit of that effect on me. Now, as to why Jessica and I are in New York, it's so I can handle some business. As the SUV we were in came to a stop, I got out. Jessica doing the same, while the rest of my security detail set up a perimeter around us. As this happened, Susan and Johnny walked out of the building we had stopped in front of, which is Fine Baxter Building. Since some of the business I have to take care of on this trip involves the F4. Putting a smile on my face, I walked up to Susan and Johnny, Jessica right behind me, who Johnny practically started drooling over the moment he laid eyes on her, while I sensed a spike of jealousy from Susan, making me grin internally, since it means she's ripening nicely. And I can't wait for the day to come when I can pluck her and eat her. I'm certain her taste will be worth the wait. Susan, Johnny, good to see you both again, I said to them, getting the brother and sister's attention back on me. Hello again, Victor, Susan said. Yeah, hey Vic, Johnny said. His gaze then immediately returned to Jessica. So, who's your friend? He asked. I'll let her answer that, Johnny, I spoke. Jessica, go ahead and introduce yourself. She nodded at my words. Jessica then looked at both Susan and Johnny. Greetings, my name is Jessica Drew. I'm Victor's personal assistant and bodyguard. A pleasure to meet you both. Victor has told me so much about the both of you. She spoke, finishing with a charming smile. Nice to meet you too, Jessica. Susan replied. My name is Susan, but if you want you can just call me Sue. And the idiot making googly eyes at you is my younger brother Johnny. Why hello there, Johnny said in a flirtatious tone. Yes, hello Jonathan, Jessica replied, giving Johnny a cold and somewhat harsh look, which made him immediately deflate upon seeing Susan, and I chuckled at this. Sorry Johnny, but a girl like Jessica is out of your league. Plus she wants some vitamin D, so sorry not sorry. So now that introductions are out of the way, let's get down to business, I spoke. Susan, have you and the others had a chance to review the proposal I emailed to you last month? I asked. Since Susan and I regularly email each other. Yes, we have. Even read. Susan replied, despite the fact he's been so obsessed with, boom. Before Susan could finish, an explosion went off. Its source, the top of the building where the four lived. Immediately noticing this, Johnny and Susan rushed inside. Jessica, we're going to, I said. Understood, sir, she replied. The two of us then followed Johnny and Susan, while I sent a message to my security team to put themselves on high alert, in case they needed to help deal with any bullshit caused by Richards. Though I'm hoping that the explosion came from a simple lab accident. Arriving at the elevator, we all stepped in, where upon seeing me and Jessica following them, Susan and Johnny got ready to protest our involvement. But before they could, I raised my left hand in their direction. No, I instantly spoke. Both Jessica and I are accompanying you, and that's final. And before you ask, we can take care of ourselves. Trust me. With that, any protests Johnny and Susan were going to make died in their throats. So with that, the four of us quickly rode the elevator up to the Four's residence and then headed straight for Reed's lab, where upon arriving we found him and Ben on the ground, in front of a portal gate, where an army of Bellurians was filing out of, being led by none other than one of the worst tyrants of the Marvel Universe, and one of the top dogs of the negative zone, Blastar. Damn Richards. Third person, POV. To say Victor was angry seeing Blastar lead his Bellurian army out of the portal in front of him, which he knew was definitely connected to the negative zone, was an understatement. He was freaking livid, considering he was now face to face with a being classified as a universal threat, having had no preparation time at all in order to face him and his followers. That's not even mentioning the fact Victor was sure this was all Reed's doing. Honestly, the only silver lining he can see at the moment is that neither Blastar nor his followers have managed to make it outside of Reed's lab yet, meaning they can be sent back to the negative zone through the portal before they cause any lasting damage, which Victor is going to make sure of. Reed, Ben, what the hell is going on here? Johnny questioned. I think that should be obvious, Jonathan. We're being invaded. Jessica spoke. Okay, seriously, Reed, what is going on? Susan asked. Like Jessica just said, we are being invaded by a damn extra-dimensional species. Victor said. But not for long. He spoke. Victor then summoned his armor to him. Now even tougher since he reforged it into a blend of vibranium and adamantium. Seeing Victor's armor, Susan and the others were surprised. Save for Jessica, who as soon as she saw Victor summon his armor used her earpiece to contact the security detail waiting outside. Code R. I repeat, we have a Code R full alert status. She spoke. Code R referring to a Code Richard situation, which Victor came up with himself, since he knew one would definitely occur before he could end Reed's existence. Understood. One of the security detail replied. Do you require assistance, ma'am? Not at the moment. Jessica replied. Copy that. The security detail agent replied. Once he did, Jessica cut off communications and quickly stripped out of her clothes, revealing the combat suit Victor had made and given her for situations just like the current ones they found themselves in. The suit itself being composed of a vibranium/adamantium microwave mesh. The design itself Victor based off the red and black spider suit Jessica wore in the comics. In no time at all Jessica was ready for battle. Victor, that armor is dash. Shut the hell up, Reed. Victor shouted, interrupting Richards. Look at the goddamn situation we're in. He exclaimed. Now all of you listen up. Susan, create a barrier around the lab, so that none of those humanoid creatures can escape it. Johnny, protect Susan. Everyone else, push them back through the portal they're coming out of. Victor ordered. As he did, Blastar began chuckling. Foolish inferior beings. Do you truly believe you can stand against the might of Blastar and his Ludash? Raising his hands in the direction of the Bellurians, Victor fired off kinetic force blasts, pushing them back and interrupting Blastar villain monologue, which Victor wasn't even paying attention to in the first place. Seeing some of his soldiers pushed back, Blastar got an angry expression on his face. Warriors, destroy them! He exclaimed. This snapped the Fantastic Four out of their stupor. Once this happened, Susan threw up a barrier around the entire interior of the lab. Let's go with Victor's plan. She spoke. What Susie said. Ben agreed. He then jumped to his feet and punched a nearby Bellurian back, before slamming that same fist into his other hand. It's clobbering time, he exclaimed. Flame on! Johnny exclaimed, his entire form becoming engulfed in flames. He then took to the air and began hurling fireballs at the Bellurians. Meanwhile, Reed began stretching like a snake, joining the battle as well. Jessica doing the same. Her hand sparking with electrical bioelectricity, she ran up to the nearest Bellurian and gave it a left uppercut, sending it off its feet and back in the direction of the portal gate. Moving on to the next target, Jessica delivered a 2-foot, spear-like kick to the chest of another Bellurian, which sent it barreling into its comrades, knocking them all off their feet. Throwing one punch after another, Ben sent the Bellurians that came at him on their asses, in the direction of the portal. Irritated at this, the Bellurians released a series of roars and charged at Ben. All bark and no bite, he said, putting a smirk on his face. Ben then slammed his hands together, creating a shockwave that sent the Bellurians charging at him back and towards the portal gate, some of them going back through it. Unleashing blast after kinetic force blast, Victor put the Bellurian army on the back foot, sending them all back through the portal gate as quickly as he could. Noticing the others were doing the same, even Reed, he nodded. As Victor punched another Bellurian in the chest, he suddenly noticed kinetic force blasts heading towards him. So in response, he summoned a force field around himself for protection. As the force blasts hit Victor's force field, they did no damage at all, leaving him entirely unharmed. Lowering his force field, Victor turned in the direction of the one who fired at him, Blastar himself, who was wearing a pissed-off expression on his face. Insolent wretch! You dare stand against Blastar? He exclaimed. Yes, I dare, Victor replied. He then rushed at Blastar and delivered a kick to his chest, making the tyrant skid back, but only a little. Soon Blastar stopped and then fired more kinetic force blasts in Victor's direction, which he deflected by generating a force field around himself. When the blast stopped once again, Victor rushed forward, his hands coated in electrical energy, and delivered punches to Blastar. The added electricity in the punches, making him cry out in pain. But that only lasted for a moment before Blastar attempted to kick Victor in the stomach. Keyword attempted. Since before Blastar could make contact with his kick, Victor jumped back. He then summoned forth a magic circle and blasted Blastar with a pure magical beam, sending him flying back towards the portal gate, where all remaining Bellurians inside of the lab were located, the rest having been sent back through the portal by Susan and the others. Though as Victor looked in that direction, he saw more Bellurians attempting to use the portal gate on their side, telling him he had to end the battle here and now. So with that on his mind, Victor generated a massive amount of electricity on his hands and flung in the direction of Blastar and his Bellurians, making them all cry out in pain. Susan, push them back through the portal, Victor told her. Right, Susan replied. She then dropped the force field she was using to protect the interior of the lab and then created a large bubble around Blastar, his soldiers, and the portal gate, which she then began to shrink rapidly, forcing Blastar and his soldiers back through the portal, until none remained. Upon seeing this, Victor nodded. He then used his technopathy to shut down all systems in Reed's lab, which in turn cut off the power supply to the portal gate, shutting it down, marking the end of the battle. It is done, Victor said, breathing a sigh of relief, since that could have turned out much worse. Though on the flip side, now Blastar has knowledge of Earth and this universe, which was not good in Victor's book. Especially since he was now back in the negative zone where a nihilist could potentially learn of their universe, who is by far worse than Blastar. Just thinking of that winged bug-eyed conqueror makes Victor recall the annihilation events from the Marvel comics in his previous life, where a nihilist led his forces from the negative zone into this reality and ravaged almost entirely the known galaxy. Well, Victor is certainly not going to let that happen here. Seems I need to accelerate my plans even further now, Victor thought. But first things first. Turning to Reed, Victor walked up to him. Then seeing Richards was about to speak, Victor raised up his left hand. Don't say a word, Reed, Victor said in a cold voice, which thankfully kept Reed from opening his mouth. Good, Victor said. Now then tell me, how did that Blastar and his people bypass your portal and enter your lab? Oh, because I invited them, Reed easily replied. I see, Victor said. Yes. But you have to understand, Victor, it was simply an opportunity one couldn't pass up. I mean, to study life born in a universe composed entirely of a dash. Before Reed could continue speaking, Victor, without any hesitation, backhanded him using his left hand, sending the so-called Mr. Fantastic crashing into a nearby wall, giving Victor quite the cathartic release. Victor, POV, ignoring the stunned looks on everyone's faces, except for Jessica, even Reed's as he picked himself up off the ground from where he landed after I hit him. I savored the absolute bliss I was feeling at the moment, from having just slapped Reed. Man, that felt even better than I was expecting. I wish I could do it again. No, scratch that, I wish I could put my hand through Reed's chest and rip his heart out and crush it in my hands. But unfortunately, that isn't an option at the moment. Though I can't wait until the time is right, that is becomes one. Victor, what the hell? Susan yelled at me. Yeah man, why'd you do that to Reed just now? Johnny questioned. Because it was his fault that Blastar and his army entered our dimension in the first place, I angrily retorted, not caring how I sounded at the moment. Because again, if things had gone any differently, we might not even be having this conversation right now. Since this may be a world based on a comic book franchise, but the people in it are very real. They can die. Which is exactly might have happened if Blastar and his army had gotten any farther before we halted them. Yet Reed doesn't seem to understand the weight of that. All he's interested in is studying my armor, which will never happen, and explaining why he allowed Blastar and his followers passage through his portal gate in the first place. He doesn't even seem the least bit remorseful for his actions. The bastard. What? Stretch, that ain't true, is it? Ben asked Reed. No, it is, Reed easily replied, as I was trying to tell Victor before he suddenly hit me when I completed my portal gate to the antimatter universe, which I have since discovered it known as the negative zone to its inhabitants. I encountered Blastar and his people, which are known as Bellurians, by the way. After this happened, we began chatting, and they told me so much about the negative zone but never asked for anything in return, except to explore our universe themselves. So I decided to grant them their request, he explained, though I had no idea they would turn out to be so hostile. Truly. Then you should have investigated them more, I spoke. Or at least installed defenses around the portal gate. I spoke. Since because of your carelessness, Reed, we had to fend off a freaking extra-dimensional invasion. Like I said, I'm sorry for that. But the opportunity was just too great to pass up. Reed spoke. Sounding like a broken record. Reed. Susan shouted. Not cool, Reed. Johnny added. Stretch, you messed up big this time. Ben spoke. Like I said, I'm so sorry doesn't fix anything, Reed. Susan interrupted. A pissed-off look on her face. Victor is right. What you did is reckless. Not to mention you didn't even tell any of us about Blastar and his people. Why, Reed? They asked me not to. They said they wanted to meet you all the day they crossed over into our world. Reed explained. Finally beginning to look dejected. Good. So they knew about us, but we didn't know about them. Ben said. Right. Reed said. Now finally looking sad. Excellent. He's finally getting what he deserves. Reed. That's wrong on so many levels, bruh. Johnny said. Yes, I understand. Reed said. Do you read truly? I asked him. I do. Reed said. Though I'm pretty sure he doesn't. But that's exactly the way I want it. Since it ties into my plans to rid the world of him. All right then. I spoke. I think Reed understands, guys. Now then, about our business. I said. Once I did so, everyone decided to move on. But now the seeds of Richard's reckless and less than remorseful personality have been implanted within the rest of the four. Meaning now it's only a matter of time before I can execute the bastard. Oh, what a glorious day that will be. Anyway, heading into the living room, we got ready to discuss business. But before we did, I sent my armor away, and Jessica redressed in her clothing. Not saying to Reed about her battle uniform, no matter when he asked. Since I will not give him any insight into my technology. That's a recipe for disaster. After we got settled, I began discussing my business with the four, which was settled in no time at all. Once it was we bid them farewell, and Jessica and I left their home, returning to the security detail, who Jessica had not only put on alert using code or during the start of the battle, but also instructed to stand down when it was over. What a good assistant she is. Getting into our SUV, the Latverian motorcade started moving. As it did, I activated my earpiece comm and contacted Brainiac. Brainiac, is it done? I asked him. Yes, Victor, it is. I am now inside all of the Fantastic Four systems. He answered me. Since I just didn't stop by the Baxter building to handle business with the F4 today, I also did so I could insert a way for Brainiac to access their systems. Considering Reed keeps them on an air-gapped network, meaning there is no way to access them externally. At least that proves he has some sort of sense. But back on topic. The reason I did this is so I could keep an eye on the four, namely the shit Reed Richards is working on, to make sure he doesn't destroy the entire damn planet or universe. Excellent. I replied to Brainiac. I then disconnected our call before getting comfortable in my seat and worked to take a nap. Since after dealing with Richards, I needed it. Well, I don't actually need it considering my body no longer needs sleep, food, or even air to function given how much I've enhanced it, but you get the idea. So soon I was off to Dreamland. February 24th, 2008. Typing away on a holographic screen in front of me, I stopped when I heard a knock on my office door. The one at the Latverian embassy, since Jessica and I are still in New York. Yes, who is it? I asked. Jessica, sir. Here with your 10 o'clock appointment. Jessica spoke from the other side of my office doors. Understood. Come in. I said, shutting down the holographic screen. Just as I did so, the door opened and Jessica stepped in, followed by my 10 o'clock himself. Norman Osborn. Insert image of Norman Osborn here. Good day to you, Mr. Osborn. I said to the man. To you as well, King Victor. Norman replied. He then came and took a seat in one of the two chairs situated in front of me desk. Once he did, I looked at Jessica once more. Thank you, Jessica, that will be all. I said. Understood, sir. She replied. Jessica then left the room, closing the door behind her. Once she did, I used my technopathy to activate all of the office's counter-surveillance equipment. I then focused all my attention once again one of the most well-known individuals in all of Marvel. So, Mr. Osborn, let's get down to the business. I spoke. Yes, let's. He replied. Since, I was quite shocked when the king of a nation that has been making waves across the entire world requested a meeting with me. So, what is it I can do for you, sir? Actually, Osborne. It is what I can do for you, I replied, earning myself a curious look from the man. I'm not sure I understand what you mean, King Victor. Oh, it's simply really. I spoke. I then leaned back in my chair and clasped my fingers together. I can help you save your wife and son from the disease that is slowly killing them both, I revealed. Since Norman's wife is still alive at the moment. Oh, and speaking of Norman, although he looks like William Dafoe, his background is that of Norman Osborn from the Insomniac Spider-Man games. Which suits my needs exactly. Hearing my words, Norman was surprised for a moment. Then he put a hard expression on his face. What do you know? He asked. More than you could ever imagine, Mr. Osborn, I replied. But with regard to you, everything I need to, I said, ready to start the real meeting with the real Norman Osborn. Third person, POV, a silence and tension filling the air of the office. Norman and Victor stared at each other. That is until Victor decided to break it. Before we begin, can I offer you a refreshment? Some water, perhaps? He asked. I know long conversations can make people quite thirsty, and I wouldn't want our talk to be interrupted by you getting a dry throat. No, Norman replied. And don't patronize me. Now tell me, how do you know about the disease affecting my wife and son? Simple. I hacked into your personal files and also examined your family's medical records. Victor easily replied. You know I could have you arrested by the authorities given what you just admitted to me, Norman said. Victor snorted upon hearing the threat. A bit of advice, Mr. Osborn. Don't make threat you can't follow through on, he said. Besides, I've got a little something called diplomatic immunity, and you have absolutely no proof to back up your claims. Whereas I, on the other hand, have quite the mountain of evidence pertaining to a certain number of your business dealings over the years, which were definitely not above board, he explained. Victor then put a cold expression on his face. So let's dispense with such talk for the remainder of this conversation. That's quite something coming from the man who just threatened me, Norman spoke. Well, turnabout is fairy play, Victor replied. But it seems we're getting off topic here. So let's get back on it. Your wife and son, I can save them, he spoke. Victor then reached into the top left drawer of his desk and pulled out a small metal case. He then placed it on the middle of the table between him and Osborn and opened it, revealing 3 vials of ambrosia serum sitting inside of it. Upon seeing the vials, Norman looked at them. What's that? He asked. A serum I developed myself, which I have chosen to name the ambrosia serum, Victor explained. Like the magical food and drink of the Greek gods, which grants those who consume it immortality or longevity, Norman spoke. Victor nodding at his words. The very same, Victor replied. And just like that mythological item, my serum has a similar effect. It doesn't make people immortal, of course, but it will cure and all diseases a person is afflicted with, including genetic ones, and has other benefits as well, he explained. Which is why I am giving you 3 doses of it. 1 for you and the others for your wife and child. Do you really expect me to believe you've created a serum that does what you're suggesting, King Victor? Norman asked. And even if you have, why are you giving it to me and my family? No, the better question is, what is taking and using this so-called ambrosia serum going to cost me? To answer your first question, the serum is absolutely real and it truly does work. Of course I know you don't believe me, but as a fellow scientist it should be simple for you to run some tests on yourself after taking it and verify if I am telling the truth or not, Victor said. As to your second question, I already answered it. I want you to be able to save your wife and son. Your wife in particular doesn't have much time left if I'm remembering correctly. And yet there isn't a cure in sight. Not even your GR27 that you've been developing for years can help her. What? Norman exclaimed. How do you know about GR27? Since it was a project only a select few at Oscorp has knowledge of. There is no way the king of an Eastern European nation should have access to that kind of information. Yet Victor did, setting off all of Norman's alarm bells. Which is why he wanted answers. In response to Norman's question, Victor put a soft smile on his face and looked Norman directly in his eyes. Why didn't I tell you earlier, Mr. Osborn? I know more than you could ever imagine, he spoke. Norman's entire body shivering at those words. As this happened, he broke eye contact with Victor, since he felt as if the man was staring directly into his soul. Don't look away from me. Victor spoke. Norman hearing authority, lacing his voice. So much so that before he realized it, he was looking Victor in the eyes once more. Good. Victor mused. Now, as I was saying, I know many things. I know how you have been working on GR27 for years in a desperate attempt to save your wife and son. I also know your board of directors is plotting to push you out so they can sell your company. What? Norman exclaimed. Yes, it's Tuesday. Victor replied. But I can help you prevent this. Why? Norman asked. Why are you doing all these things for me? Do you want money, my company's research? What is it you want? He finally asked, wanting to know Victor's motives. The truth is, I want you, Norman. Victor said. Well, specifically, I want your help. With what? Norman asked. Saving the world. Victor replied. Hearing this, Norman was about to ask Victor if he was serious. But seeing the look on the man's face made any words he was going to say did in his throat. Since the look Victor was sporting told him he was deadly serious. Saving the world? Norman questioned. Yes. Victor replied. He then stood up from his seat and turned to gaze out the window directly behind his desk, placing his hands behind his back like Morpheus from the Matrix. This world we call home, Norman, is beautiful, filled with wondrous things, but also wrought with many, many dangers. More than people realize, or care to acknowledge. Victor spoke. What do you mean? Norman asked. When he did, Victor turned back around to face him, a smile plastered on his face. I'm glad you asked. He spoke. The dangers I speak of involve people. I have collectively bestowed the term EVO, which stands for Evolved Human. People who gain extraordinary abilities, either through experimentation or naturally. I'm sure you've heard of mutants. Norman nodded. Well, they would fall into the EVO category, along with the likes of Captain America, along with many others who call Earth home, whose numbers are increasing every day, whether governments or the public would like to admit it or not. And while most of these EVOs just want to live in peace, there are some who would seek to destroy the world. Not to mention the governments or organizations that seem to turn EVOs into nothing more than living weapons. Then there are those EVOs who have been alive for centuries, hiding in the shadows just waiting to do away with humanity. And that's not even adding in the other threats out there, such as the extra-dimensional and extraterrestrial ones. Aliens are real. Norman questioned. They are. Victor easily replied. Along with so much more. There are beings out there who consider themselves gods due to the power they wield. There are also actual gods out there, along with vast interstellar empires. He spoke. Though the more he did, the more Norman's fear rose. You're scared, Victor stated, watching Norman's reactions to his words. Good, you should be, he said. Sometimes I even find myself frightened by all that is out there, wishing on some level deep down they didn't exist. But they do. As such, I am facing my fear and preparing to deal with the threats out there, which could ground Earth and the entire human race to dust in an instant. Believe me, I do. Norman replied. I do. Though you still haven't explained exactly how you're going to save the world from these threats. By uniting it under one banner. Victor replied. When he did so, Norman got a shocked expression on his face. You can't mean, are you saying you want to take over and rule the entire world? Well, yes, but also no. Victor replied. I think that's either a yes or a no question. Norman retorted. It depends on how you look at things. Victor said. And how exactly should I look at the fact you just admitted to me you want to rule the world? Norman questioned. Because I know you're thinking I'm going to launch a bloody campaign across the entire globe and begin dominating the planet through fear and with an iron fist, right? Victor asked. Yes. Norman replied. Well, I'm not going to do that. Victor replied. For the most part. At least if I can avoid it. Which is in part of what I want your help with. You see, to help me unite the world, I'm putting together a remarkable group of people. To do the things necessary, and who share my vision to see the human race survive and thrive. For now, let's call it a cabal of sorts. One which I found you a good candidate to become a part of. Why? Norman asked. Because you know how to live in the gray. You do what you need to do to survive. But more than all, that you're a man who's willing to go to any lengths for his family. Which I greatly admire. Victor explained. That's why I want you as a member of my cabal. Well, also because of your reputation. connections in the business and political worlds, and your brilliant mind. Victor also wanted Norman in his cabal to make sure he, and no one closely related to him, never became the Green Goblin in this universe. Though of course he couldn't say that out loud. What you're suggesting? Many throughout history have tried it. Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, Napoleon. Tell me, how do you think you'll do any better than them? Norman asked Victor. It's simple. I am Doom, Victor said. As he did so, Norman suddenly felt a pressure he hadn't felt before. The pressure of a king, a ruler. I see. I understand. Norman replied. I'm glad you do. Victor replied. Oh, and as for an answer to my proposal, you don't have to give me one right now. I'll be in New York for the rest of the month and all of March. So take that time and think on it. He explained. I'll do that. Norman replied. Good, that's all I ask. Victor spoke. Once he did, he closed up the case contained the 3 vials of ambrosia serum and handed them to Norman. Oh, and please don't forget these. A gift from me to you. Even if you don't join my cabal. Though if you don't, then you better stay out of my way, Mr. Osborn, he said, giving Norman a cold look. Because none shall stand in the way of Dr. Doom. Victor spoke. Yes. Norman replied. But you are awfully trusting, giving me this serum. It's fine. Since you'll never be able to recreate it. Not because I don't think you're smart enough, but because I've already taken measures against such things. Victor explained. Since he had encoded not only the ambrosia serum, but all other serums he had created to date, with a genetic lock. One that would make it impossible to recreate them, whether it to be from a pure serum sample or from a serum taker's blood. The key to the lock being Victor's own DNA and unique magical signature. So unless someone knew enough magic and science like he did, they were shit out of luck. Since Victor would never be that trusting. I see. Norman replied. Well, this meeting has been very informative. Goodbye. Same to you. Victor replied. Norman Osborn then took his leave from his office. Once he did, Victor returned to looking out the window, wondering what Norman's decision would be. Now only time would tell. March 5, 2008, Osborn family residence. Sitting in his home office, Norman Osborn was deep in thought. The thing occupying his thoughts being Victor Von Doom, and the proposal he made to him a week ago. As well as the fact everything Victor had told him during their meeting was the absolute truth. Because the moment he returned home, Norman began quietly looking into Oscorp board of directors, and discovered they were eventually planning to box him out and sell the company. To say Norman was angry was an understatement. For those people to think they could just take away what he had spent most of his adult life building, pouring his blood and sweat into. It made Norman livid at his board. Which is why as soon as he discovered their little plot, he had begun taking steps to see it never came to pass. He was also preparing for a purge within his company. To make sure nothing like what his board was plotting ever happened again. Norman was going to make examples out of them. Since he is not a man to be crossed. Moving on from that, Norman also investigated the ambrosia serum Victor had given him, and found his claims regarding that to be true as well. From the effects of the serum, which he discovered firsthand since he tested it on himself, to the fact he couldn't even replicate it in the slightest. Both facts which were insane to Norman. Yet they were true. And that's why Norman was so deep in thought about Victor's offer to join his cabal. Just the benefits he has received already from being offered membership were immense. So Norman could only imagine what benefits he would receive if he actually joined Victor's group. The thing is, Norman knew if he accepted Victor's offer, he would then start helping the man to take over the world. To bring it under his rule. And Norman wasn't sure he could do that. Since he isn't afraid to admit to himself he is a man with loose morals. But that and world domination are two very different things. Or as Victor called it, uniting the world under one banner to keep it from being destroyed. What should I do? Norman asked himself. As he did, his office door opened and his wife Emily stepped inside. Seeing her, Norman couldn't stop a smile from forming on his face. As well as immense relief and happiness from springing forth in his heart. Since thanks to the ambrosia serum Victor gave him, Emily no longer had the threat of death hanging over her head from her disease. Because after Norman confirmed the serum effects, he went ahead and injected Emily with it. The serum curing her. Making Norman cry tears of joy. It also proved Victor wasn't lying to him. Yes, dear. Norman asked his wife. Just wanted to let you know that dinner is ready and that Harry and I are seated and waiting. Emily spoke. Thank you, dear. Norman replied. I'll be out in a moment. He said. Okay. Emily replied. She then closed the door to his office. As she did, Norman couldn't help but think what would have happened if Victor hadn't given him the ambrosia serum. Would he still be able to have family dinners? Emily's condition had only been getting worse. The GR27 research has come to a standstill. Then there was Norman's complicated relationship with his son Harry. The two of them had never been particularly close, Emily being the glue that held them together. If she had died, where would that have left them? Such thoughts swirling around in his mind, Norman finally made a decision in regards to Victor's proposal. One he felt deep down he wouldn't regret. March 8, 2008. New York Latvian Embassy. So, have you made your decision in regards to my proposal? Victor asked Norman. The two of them back in the same office they were in just a few days ago. I have. Norman replied. But first allow me to thank you. Not only in regards to informing about the treachery being plotted against me by my company board, but also for saving the life of my wife and son. He spoke. It's no problem. Victor replied. Especially since I want you as a friend, Norman. Well, now you do. Especially since I have decided to accept your offer. I am joining your cabal. Norman spoke. Good. Victor replied. Not even bothering to stop the smile forming on his face. Since he had finally taken his first step in forming his own version of the Cabal/Dark Illuminati from the comics that would do things the right way and achieved all the group desired. I promise you, Norman, you won't regret this. Victor spoke. No, I don't think I will either. Norman replied. The two men then shook hands, becoming the first in a group that would play a monumental role in the fate of Earth and all those who called it home. Victor, POV. After Norman agreed to join the Cabal, we discussed a few more things before he took his leave. But not before I gave him an untraceable cell phone which we would use to contact each other, and a tablet containing several plans and ideas I had for the future, along with a bit of information on the threats I told Norman about during our first meeting. Since I want him to have some idea of exactly what he's going to be dealing with now that he's agreed to become my ally. The first of many I plan to gather. Leaning back in my chair after Norman left, I put my feet up on my desk. So, I take it your meeting with Norman went well? Brainiac asked me. Since the counter-surveillance equipment I have installed in this office is even capable of keeping AI like him out. Yeah, I'm that paranoid. But again, this is a version of Marvel Universe, so it's not truly paranoia when you think about it. Did. I replied. He's agreed to join the Cabal. Cool. Brainiac said. Right. I said. So, got anything new to report to me? I asked him. Since the two of us haven't talked business in a few days, I always like to give Brainiac some time to handle it, so I make sure our chats are always a few days apart. Unless we have something of extreme importance to discuss. No, not at the moment. Brainiac told me. Okay. I replied. Though I do have something to tell you. We're ramping things up. I take it this is because of Blastar and his Bellurians? Brainiac asked. It's like you're reading my mind, my friend. I replied. Yes, that is exactly the reason we're accelerating things. Because I do not wish to be so unprepared ever again. I said. That's why I think now is the perfect time to awaken them. The Spartans and Primarchs. Are you absolutely sure, Victor? Brainiac asked me. I mean, they're all ready, but I thought you wanted to take that slow because of the reactions your citizens might have. Don't worry. I'll handle my citizens, and I hear you. But if we are accelerating things, we'll need them. So we're bringing them online, end of story. Understood. Brainiac said. I'll begin making preparations in regards to them then. Excellent. I spoke. But only in regards to the Spartans, I'll handle the Primarchs personally. Yes. Brainiac replied. We then ended our conversation. Once we did so, I informed Jessica I was going to go do some work in my lab. I then opened a portal to it and stepped through, closing it behind me after I did. All ready to take the first step of transforming myself from a simple king to an emperor. After entering my lab, I first went to go and change my suit into some more comfortable clothing. I then grabbed myself a medical injection gun, along with a vial of the ambrosia serum, and my personalized Compound V serum, which I have formally decided to name Compound D. The D, of course, standing for Doom. Boy, it truly is good to be Doom. The serums and injection gun in hand, I headed to my lab state-of-the-art medical room. Which it has because spatial manipulation and subdimension magic are so busted it's not even funny. Anyway, when I arrived, 2 Doombots were waiting for me, since I had called for them. For they would assist me in case anything went wrong as I injected myself with both serums. Why, you ask? Because I need more power. I know I'm strong already, but that battle with Blastar truly reminded me what could be out there. That's why I need to surpass my current limits and go beyond. Not only for my own sake, but for the sake of all those who trust and rely on me. So with that in mind, I loaded the vial of the ambrosia serum into the medical injection gun, and placed it against my right arm. "Victor, are you sure?" Brainiac asked me, since he's monitoring my situation right now as well. "Yes," I replied. I then pulled the trigger of the injection gun without any hesitation, and the serum flowed into my body. Once it did, I placed the gun on the counter and took a seat as my body began to incorporate it. 5 minutes passing before the ambrosia serum incorporation was completed. When it was, I loaded the compound D into the injection gun, placed it against my left arm, and pulled the trigger, placing that serum inside my body as well. Immediately seizing up and falling to the floor afterwards. When I did, the Doombots immediately sprang into action and moved me one of her medical beds. "Sir, your vitals are all over the place. Allow me to bring in assistance." Brainiac spoke. "No." I managed to grit out. Given my body was in immense pain. I could feel my bones literally breaking and resetting themselves. "But my king dash," I said in O. I shouted with authority. "Enduring the pain. Since it will not stop me from achieving what I want. Nothing will. I swear it." After 10 long minutes, the pain in my body finally subsided. When it did, I easily sat up, feeling better than I ever have in either of my lives. "Brainiac, what do the scans say?" I asked me. "Your body seems to have stabilized, my king," he replied. As he did so, I held up my right fist, and the second after I did, it became engulfed in a dark green energy. "Whoa, Victor, the room's radiation sensors just spiked," Brainiac told me. "Interesting," I mused. I then stopped the dark green energy surrounding my right first. Once I did, I got up and began running a battery of tests on myself to make sure my body was truly okay. Which it was. After confirming that, I moved on to see what new abilities I had. Though other than another increase in my physical capabilities and my regeneration factor, the only new power I gained was the ability to produce that glowing green energy, which, as if turns out, is atomic energy. Yeah, apparently my compound D gave me the power to convert my bioelectricity into atomic energy, which I can project outward as powerful blasts. Just like the first atomic skull from DC Comics. Except without a computer chip in my head. To say I wasn't disappointed would be true, since I just got another amazing power in my arsenal. The medical tests done, and me learning what my new abilities were, I left the medical lab, the Doombots following behind me. We then walked through my laboratory facility until we came to a door and walked through it. After doing so, the Doombots, who are accompanying me, and I found ourselves surrounded on both sides by men and women floating in clear tanks. The men and women in question being genetically engineered soldiers I created by pulling a Warhammer 40k and using my own DNA as a base. They are Project Spartan. They will be the main soldiers of my army. All of them having been given the ambrosia and my personalized SS serum on top of everything else I have bestowed them with. My warriors. None of whom will ever betray me. Since when I was creating them, I literally embedded within their DNA an unshakable and unbreakable loyalty to my kingdom, but above all to me, their creator. As I walked past the Spartans and their tanks, I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy and pride. For they are one of my greatest achievements to date. But honestly, they come in second to those I have created to lead them. Moving through the tank area containing the Spartans, I arrived at a set of doors. When I did, a red beam quickly passed over and scanned my entire body. A second after this happened, the doors in front of me opened up and I, and the Doombots with me, stepped forward into a room containing only 5 cloning tanks, which housed my first 5 Primarchs, the generals who will lead my armies. The best of the best in every single way. From strength to intelligence, cunning. All of them having been given the ambrosia serum, my personalized SS serum, and most recently compound D, walking over to the control terminal within the room. I checked on the vitals of the 5 of them. Seeing they were all stable, I nodded. "Alright then. Let's get this show on the road," I muttered to myself. I then initiated the Primarch's awakening procedure. Once I did, the fluid inside each of their tanks drained out until they were entirely dry. Then the front of each tank slowly opened up. After which each of the Primarchs slowly but surely opened their eyes and climbed out of their pods. As they did so, I opened a portal and pulled out 5 robes. One for each of them. Since they were entirely naked while inside of their gestation tanks. All 5 robes in my hand, I closed the portal. I then walked over to the Primarchs and handed a robe to each of them, which they took without any hesitation and put on. For just like the Spartans, I embedded an unwavering loyalty to my kingdom and me within their DNA during their creation. I also implanted within their brains massive amounts of information, such as battle tactics and strategies, numerous languages, the names of everyday items like forks and knives, etc. As the Primarchs covered up their important bits, I took note of each of them. The first is a 6 feet 5 inches tall African-American male with a full beard and short black hair, while sporting deep brown eyes. Oh, and as to why he's a different race than me despite essentially being created from my DNA, as I stated earlier, I only used my DNA as a base for the creation of the Spartan and the Primarchs, though I manipulated and altered it in various ways during their inception, since I didn't want exact clones of me running around. I've read enough comics and seen enough anime to know that shit never ends well. The second is a 7-foot-tall Caucasian male with short black hair and a handlebar mustache covering his face, sporting deep black eyes. The third is a 6 feet 3 inches tall Caucasian male with shoulder-length dirty blonde hair and deep green eyes, with a clean-shaven face. The fourth is one of the 2 females of the group. She is 6 feet 3 inches tall and sports, and I'm not kidding here, green skin. Her hair is a deep shade of red and flows to her mid-back, while her eyes are the color of emeralds. The fifth and final Primarch is the only other female of the group. She is also the shortest, standing around a cool 6 foot. Though like her fellow female Primarch, her appearance is unique in that she sports red skin. But she has shoulder-length short black hair and deep blue eyes. As I look to the 2 female Primarchs once again, I can only assume their outward physical appearances are the result of being injected with Compound D, since none of the other Primarchs of Spartans have exhibited such outward physical appearances. At least not yet. This definitely requires further testing. But that can wait until later. After the Primarchs out on their robes, they all came and stood before me. They then each got on one knee and bowed their heads in my direction. Then in unison they all spoke. All hail Emperor Doom. Music to my ears. Thank you, my Primarchs. Now, arise. I told them. Which they did. Good. Now, follow me. We have much work to do. I spoke. I then turned and began waking. My Primarchs following right behind me. Their Crestor and Emperor. After leaving the Primarchs' birthing chamber, as I have dubbed it, I took them to one of the rooms of my laboratory facility that held proper clothing. I then had all of them get dressed. Once they did, I took them to medical lab where I ran several basic tests on them to make sure none of them had any issues. They didn't. Still, I had to make sure, since as their creator, they are my responsibility. So once that done, I took them to one of the facility's training rooms to see their superhuman abilities in action myself, and get a handle on the additional and unique powers each one of them was granted by the Compound D, which took 2 entire hours. But it was a 2 hours well spent, since I was able to determine each one of the Primarch's individual power sets. First, the African-American male got self-sustained flight, heat vision, X-ray vision, and self-sustenance. Second, the 7-footer also got self-sustained flight and self-sustenance. But he also has become a biochemical fusion reactor, meaning he can absorb, generate, and manipulate energy. He also becomes more powerful the more physical damage he takes, making him just like Grant Emerson/Damage from DC Comics. Nice. Third, the blonde got telekinesis and telepathy on the level of what this world refers to as Omega-class mutants, along the likes of Jean Grey and Emma Frost. Fourth, the green-skinned woman got pheromone production, toxikinesis, toxin immunity, and chlorokinesis. Her powers also seem to be tied to magic from what I sensed. So I'll definitely start training her property in the mystic arts the first chance I got. Finally, the red-skinned woman can freely alter her size, becoming as tall as 25 feet or as small as something only visible under a microscope. Looks like all 5 of my Primarchs have been blessed with great and diverse powers. A fact I love. Since I don't want any of them, or any more Primarchs I create in the future, to be exactly the same. I want diversity, since that can breed excellence and the best. Which is why I created the Primarchs in the first. Because if I simply wanted uniformity, I would simply stuck with my Doombots. Oh, and as to what I'm referring to the Primarchs by their physical features, it's because none of them have proper names. Which I am just about to rectify. All of you gather around. I commanded my Primarchs, who were scattered about the room. But when I called out for them, they instantly stopped what they were doing and lines up in front of me. From your medical tests to your physical ones, all looks well. I told them. And now with those out of the way, I feel it is fine I bestowed you all proper names. I spoke. I then turned my attention to the African-American Primarch. When I did, he kneeled. From now on you shall be known as Zod. I told him. Because given his powers, I feel it's one of the only natural choices of a name for him. Thank you, my Emperor. Zod replied. And following that, I make you this declaration here and now. All those who stand against you, or those you direct me towards, shall kneel before Zod. Before they kneel before Doom. He spoke. I'll hold you to that, Zod. I replied. I then shifted my gaze to the 7-footer Primarch. Your name shall be Thrag. Thank you, Emperor Doom. He replied. Thrag then kneeled before me. Once he did, I shifted my gaze to the blonde. You shall be known as Thaddeus. Thank you, my Emperor. Thaddeus replied. He too then kneeled before me. After he did, I looked at the green-skinned woman. Your name will be Ivy. I told her, considering she has exactly the same powers and appearance of Poison Ivy from DC Comics. Why, thank you, Emperor Doom. Ivy replied. She too then kneeled, leaving only one remaining. I turned my gaze to the red-skinned woman. Your name shall be Katma. I told her, since she's the spitting image of Katma 2A from DC Comics. Just like Ivy resembles Poison Ivy, both of whom I did not create on purpose. I'm serious. This was all completely random, as you have decreed, my Emperor. Katma said. She then kneeled. All 5 of my Primarchs now kneeling before me. I can definitely get used to this, I thought. I then made a motion with my left hand. Arise. I told them. When I did, they all stood in unison. So, my Emperor, what is our next move? Thaddeus asked me. Well, right now all of you will remain in this facility for the time being and get better acclimated to the world itself. I told them. Which Brainiac will assist you with? That I will. Brainiac spoke up. The Primarchs already knowing about him. Currently, I am taking care of some matters in New York in the US and will be until the 1st of April. That is when I will officially return to Latveria. Then once I do, when we can truly begin to move forward. But until then you are all on standby. Any further questions? No one spoke up. Alright then. Well then, good day. And remember, should you encounter any big issues, know that I will be here to assist you at a moment's notice. I told them. I then took my leave of my laboratory facility and returned to my office at the New York Embassy. Extremely happy how well my first Primarchs turned out. What a glorious day this has been. March 18, 2008. Third person, POV. Her brow furrowed, Susan Storm paced back and forth across the floor of the waiting room she was in. The white heels she was wearing making an audible clacking sound on the floor as she did. Stop it, Susan. You'll tire yourself out that way. Victor spoke. Since he was also in the waiting room. But he was seated on one of the room's sofas, wearing a calm expression on his face. As to why the two of them were together. They were waiting to be called to speak in front of a press concert that Victor had put together in order to make a big announcement. Which also concerned the Fantastic Four, who had sent Susan as their representative for today's event. Stopping in her tracks, Susan turned to look at Victor. However, before she could say anything, there was a knock on the door. They're ready for you both, Jessica said from outside. Understood. Thank you, Jessica. Victor replied. He then stood up and moved closer to Susan. He then offered her his left arm. Susan Storm, would you do me the honor of escorting you? He asked. Fine. Susan grumbled, though she did so with a smile on her face. Interlocking her arm with Victor's, they exited the room and then headed outside, where they then stepped onto a makeshift stage that had been set up right in front of the Latverian embassy, which was currently being crowded by reporters and news personnel, as well as many civilians, all of whom directed their attention to Susan and Victor the moment they appeared. The pair ignored them as they got into position on stage in front of the podium, where a microphone was situated. Once they did, Victor lightly tapped on it, which silenced all voices in the area. Seeing this, Victor nodded. He then moved his finger from the microphone and spoke into it. "Thank you for that," he said. "Now then, allow me to welcome you all here today. Most of you likely already know who I am, given my actions during the last couple of years. But for those of you who don't, my name is Victor Werner von Doom, the head of state and king of the nation known as Latveria," he said. "And the lovely woman by my side is sure I'm someone you all know. Susan Storm, aka the Invisible Woman, a member of the Fantastic Four." After hearing her name spoken, Susan smiled and waved at the crowd, eliciting cheers from them, which Victor waited to settle down before speaking again. "Okay. With the introductions out of the way, let Susan and I explain the reason we call you all here today. It's to talk about the future. Specifically, the future of the next generation. You see, when I was a young boy growing up in Latveria, I did not have the tools nor the resources available to me to match my potential. I had to struggle and go through many trials and tribulations to get the tools and resources I needed to reach my full potential. But by then I was basically an adult. One who, not to brag or anything, has made quite something of himself. But despite my many achievements, I can't forget my past. I always wondered what I could have become if I had the tools and resources I needed to reach my potential during my youth. That's one of the reasons I created the Werner Academy in my home country of Latveria. And why I am here, standing before you all today to announce the creation of an organization that is specifically geared towards helping the next generation achieve their full potential, and then some, like I never had the opportunity to do. Its name: the Future Foundation. Victor spoke. He then stepped back and let Susan take up position in front of the podium and the microphone. The Future Foundation is a non-profit organization that will be specifically geared towards supporting underprivileged youths in the areas of science, math, technology, and mathematics, or STEM for short, by providing them grants to work on projects they submit and are approved of by the foundation. They will even in certain cases be provided scholarships by the foundation. A foundation all of us in the Fantastic Four fully support. Which is why we are working in concert with our friend and colleague Victor von Doom to see it made into a reality. Because like Victor just so well put some people out there just don't have the same resources and opportunities as others. Well, we of the Fantastic Four and our partner Dr. Doom wish to do our part and close that gap just a little. Susan spoke. Then the second after she finished speaking, the crowd erupted in both cheers and questions, which Victor let Susan handle. While he was busy savoring the fact another one of his ideas went exactly as planned. The Future Foundation was now a thing, which would give Victor access to numerous smart and talented individuals. Many who were definitely going to be characters from Marvel. But he also knew there would be many who were not. Though that made things even better in Victor's eyes, since he would have access to so much untapped and unknown potential, which he knew those pestering him wouldn't like. Making one of the many reasons he got the Fantastic Four involved with his foundation. Given their hero status, general popularity, and respect from within the scientific community courtesy of Sue and Richards, anyone would be hard-pressed to mess with the foundation with them involved, since it might draw the wrong kind of attention. So once again, for Dr. Doom, everything has gone according to plan. Eventually Susan called out to Victor. Once he did, he stepped back up to the podium and answered a few questions of his own. Then after he did, he and Susan left the stage and returned to within the embassy. After doing so, Victor led Susan to a sitting room. Just as Jessica was dropping off a tray with 2 glasses and a bottle of scotch on it. "Thank you, Jessica," Victor told her. "Of course," Jessica replied. She then excused her. Victor picking up on Susan's jealousy as she did. This woman, Victor thought. "Susan, there's no need for you to be so jealous of Jessica," Victor spoke. When he did, Susan whipped her head in his direction. "What? I'm not jealous of her," she denied. Victor giving her a deadpan look in response. "Really? Then what's with that ice-cold glare you give her every time you're in the same room?" he asked. "I don't do that," Susan denied. "Do I?" "You do," Victor replied. Though it was a lie. Susan never did that. He just wanted her to admit her jealousy. "I see," Susan mused. "Well, I'm sorry, it's just..." She trailed off. "Just what?" Victor asked, stepping closer to Susan. "Nothing," Really? Susan said, suddenly feeling her face heat up, given how close Victor was to her. Oh come on, I think we both know it's nothing. Victor replied. He then gently grasped Susan's face using his right hand and turned her head in his direction. Their eyes meeting as a result. Victor the first. I think I should go, Susan managed to say, despite hearing her heartbeat in her ears. No, stay, Victor said. Since we both know it's what you truly want to do. And what I want as well, Susan, he said. Then before Susan could say anything else, Victor gently leaned down and kissed her. As this happened, Susan wrapped her hands around Victor's neck and pulled him deeper into the kiss he had started without even realizing it. They stayed in that position for over a minute before Victor broke the kiss. Susan, slightly panting as he did. So, still want to go? Victor asked. No, Susan replied. Then that means you're prepared for what's about to happen? Victor asked. Oh Victor, just shut up, Susan said. She then pulled him down and initiated another kiss. One which led into Reed Richards never getting a shot with Susan Storm ever again. Not after she got acquainted with some vitamin D from Doom's now 10-inch long injection tool. Third person, POV, in the void of space all was the same. Until suddenly it wasn't. Out of nowhere a spacecraft appeared in the void. The trajectory it was traveling on putting it on a direct course with Earth. Victor, POV beep beep. Before the beeping of my phone could continue, I shut it off using my technopathy. I then sat up in bed, careful not to disturb Susan who was lying right beside me. Though considering the workout I gave her earlier, I don't think she'll waking up at least until noon tomorrow. Not that I'm bragging or anything. Okay, I am a little. But finally being with Susan was everything I imagined and more. Even if I had to severely hold back. Because although Susan is superhuman physical capabilities she does not have. And I didn't want to cause her death by SNU. Anyway, using my technopathy, I accessed my phone and found it was Brainiac contacting. Yes, Brainiac? I asked him using my technopathy. Sorry to disturb the night you've been waiting for with a lovely invisible woman, Victor. But this couldn't wait. Our satellites picked up a craft of unknown origin entering Earth's atmosphere a few seconds ago, and you specifically asked to be alerted should that ever happen. Brainiac spoke, doing his job as excellent as always. Since I asked for just that when I first brought him online. Given how many hostile alien species exist here in Marvel, I wanted to be the first one to know if they ever arrived on Earth. Because I don't trust any of the other players out there to deal with them accordingly. That I did. First off, good job as usual, my friend. Secondly, has anyone else picked up the craft yet? I spoke. No, the moment our satellites detected it, I began masking the craft's signal from all other sensors except our own. And before you ask, I have already calculated its trajectory and landing zone, which is actually right next door to your location, since it will touch down in Essex County, New York. Specifically the Adirondack Mountains. Brainiac explained. Good again, good work. Now then, prepare one of hangar bays for containment in the laboratory facility. Dispatch a contingent of Doombots to the ship's landing location. Also, tell Zod to meet me there. I ordered. Since I want to salvage anything of that ship should it remain intact after its landing. As for why I'm asking Zod to coming along, I think this is the perfect opportunity to see how one of my Primarchs performs in the field. Understood, my Emperor. Brainiac replied. We then ended our conversation. Once we did, I stood up and then quickly slipped into some comfortable clothes. I then made sure Susan was comfortable in bed before taking my leave, to go and greet our extraterrestrial visitor, and determine if I needed to go predator on their butts. Upstate New York, Essex County, Adirondack Mountain Range. Stepping out my portal in my full armor, I closed it. Just as I did so, Zod landed on the ground on my right side. Dressed in the special adamantium/vibranium battle armor I had designed for all my Primarchs to wear. Shortly after he did so, the Doombots Brainiac had assigned to this mission for me arrived as well. Zod. I said to him. My Emperor. He replied. Are you well? I asked him. I am. Zod replied. And I am honored you chose me to assist you in this endeavor. I promise I will not fail you. See that you don't. I retorted. I then used my technopathy to relay my orders to the Doombots, who spread out and contained the area, to make sure nothing got in and nothing got out. Once that was done, Zod, and I simply began waiting. Then before I knew it, 30 minutes passed before my sensors picked up the craft closing in on the position. As it did, both Zod and I turned out gaze to it. Then followed it with them until it made landfall. Though the ship didn't crash, it actually landed. When it did so, I took to the air and began flying straight towards it, Zod following right behind me. In no time at all we reached the craft and landed outside of it. We then got ready to approach it. But the moment we did so, my spider sense went off. And the second after it did, I found a spear sailing straight towards me from a suddenly receded section of the ship. Though with my abilities, it was easy to catch. Once I snapped the spear in two, letting it fall to the ground. I then held up my free hand to keep Zod from moving, which I noticed he was about to do. Not yet, Zod. Let's wait and see for a bit longer. I ordered him. Yes, my emperor. He replied. He then stood down. As Zod did, a figure exited the spacecraft and then turned their attention towards the two of us. When they did do, I noticed instantly I was looking at a female Shi'ar, confirming their existence in this reality for me. Not only that, but this particular female Shi'ar looks familiar to me. I just can't place her. Quickly looking between me and Zod, the female Shi'ar sneered. So, looks like this planet isn't as primitive as I thought after all. She haughtily spoke. This planet you are speaking about is known as Earth, and it is under my protection. Now, who are you and why have you come here? I spoke. You dare to speak to me like that, you primitive backwater backworlder. The female Shi'ar spat, a look of anger suddenly marring her face. It seems you do not know with whom you speak. So I will educate you. My name is Kalsi Naramani, a member of the Naramani family, and the rightful heir to the throne of the Shi'ar Empire. There, now you are no longer ignorant on whom you are dealing with. So I'll forgive you earlier foolishness. But do so again and your life is forfeit. Do you understand, primitive? Ah, so she's Deathbird. I thought. That explains why she looks so familiar. My emperor, shall I end the avian woman's life? Zod asked me. No, Zod. I replied. Because if what she claims is true, then she is just as valuable as her ship. Which is why we'll be taking her alive. I explained. As you say, my liege. Zod replied. When he did, Deathbird expression became even more twisted. You dare blatantly ignore me. She seethed. But before Deathbird could say anything else, I closed the distance between us, coated my left fist with electrical energy, and delivered a punch straight to her gut. My attack landing, sending a jolt electricity all through the princess's body. Ag. She cried in pain. But surprisingly, she didn't pass out. Staying conscious, she grabbed hold of my armor and began clawing at it, surprising me just a bit. But then I remembered she was not only a Shi'ar, but a Shi'ar mutant. One who also a mighty warrior that led legions of starships, and members of the fearsome Shi'ar Imperial Guard. So with that now in my mind, I acted accordingly and upped the voltage of my electric shock. Ag. Deathbird crying out and seen more pain in response. But this time she did pass out. Once I was certain of this, I tossed her over my left shoulder like a sack of potatoes, allowing myself to cop a feel of her toned rear. Since ass is first class and I'm a butt man at heart. After I was done savoring the feeling of Deathbird, I turned around to face Zod, who had walked up to us. Once he did, I snapped my fingers and opened a portal under Deathbird's ship, sending it to the hangar bay. Brainiac had intimated containment protocols on when he contacted me earlier. As soon as the ship was through, I closed the portal shut. Lead the Doombots on a search of the surrounding area to make sure we didn't miss anything. I'm going to deal with our prisoner, I told Zod. He nodded at my words. Zod then took to the skies. As he did so, I opened a portal and stepped through it, preparing myself to have a chat with Deathbird, who is actually quite easy on the eyes. In fact, touching her but made me a little hard. So yeah. As Palpatine would say, it was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Seems I might just stick my D in crazy. Especially when doing so will allow me to bring the Shi'ar Empire under my rule. Man, tonight just keeps getting better. Third person, POV, stirring awake Kalsi Naramani, also known as Deathbird, slowly but surely opened her eyes. Then a second after she did so, she remembered everything that had happened to her, which made her anger spike. Though before it could get any higher, a voice drew Deathbird's attention. Looks like you're finally awake. Turning her head in the direction of the voice, Deathbird saw a man sitting in a chair in front of her. Who are you? And where am I? Deathbird demanded to know. But in response to her questions, the man in the chair only put a soft smile on his face. Come now, you're saying you don't remember me from earlier. That hurts me a little, you know. Especially given how up close and personal we got, he said. When he did so, the pieces clicked together in Deathbird's head. You, Deathbird exclaimed. You're the one in the armor who attacked me earlier. Yes, that's me, the man replied. And since I didn't do so earlier properly, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Dash, you will pay for attacking me. Deathbird suddenly screamed, interrupting Victor. She then got ready to lunge at him from the bed she was on. But before Deathbird could move 1 inch, Victor raised his left hand in her direction and blasted her with several bolts of electricity. Ag! Stopping Deathbird in her tracks and making her cry out in pain, which she continued to do as Victor continued blasting her with electricity, until he felt she had had enough. Once he did, he stopped attacking her, leaving Deathbird twitching on the bed, a small bit of smoke rising from her body. So rude, Victor said. Now, as I was saying earlier, my name is Victor Werner von Doom, the king and ruler of the Earth nation of Latveria, as well as the soon-to-be emperor of the planet Earth and the entire solar system, he explained. And you, my dear Kalsi Naramani, are now my prisoner. You dare imprison me, back, worlder. Deathbird managed to spit out. Struggling to speak due to the minor paralysis the electrical blasts Victor had hit her with induced. Do you have any idea of whom you're truly dealing with? Yes, you've made that quite clear, Victor retorted. You dare patronize me, primitive? Deathbird shouted, the paralysis now having fully worn off. I am the rightful heir to one of the most powerful empires the galaxy has ever seen or known. You keep saying that, and yet here you are on some primitive backwater world, as you put it, the captive of one of its natives. So really, what does that say about you? Victor spoke, putting a sly grin on his face. Seeing Victor's grin made Deathbird see red. She then lunged out of her bed toward Victor, her claw-like hands aimed towards his throat, ready to rip it out. But before Deathbird could even touch Victor, he stood up out of the chair he was sitting in, closed the distance between them, and wrapped his left hand around her throat. He then moved and slammed Deathbird face first into the right side wall of the cell they were in, which didn't crack at all, since the entire cell was fashioned from adamantium. Gah! Deathbird cried. But before she could do anything else, Victor slammed her into the wall again, this time back first. He then began holding her in that position. When this happens, Deathbird began struggling, attacking Victor's arm with her claw-like nails, doing anything and everything she could to break out of his grip. But it was to no avail. Victor's grip was iron-tight on Deathbird's throat, and nothing she did even fazed him. She couldn't even injure him in the slightest. What is this, primitive? Deathbird thought. Since in her entire life she had only ever encountered a handful of people as strong as Victor. The first one coming to her mind, the leader of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, the mighty Gladiator. Don't tell me he's as strong as Gladiator? Deathbird thought. Hey! Which she was knocked out off the moment Victor spoke. Look at me, he said. No, commanded. Then before Deathbird realized it, she was following said command and looking at Victor, who now wore a cold and hardened expression on his face. It seems you truly can't grasp the situation you are in, so I'll explain once more to you slowly. So perhaps you can come to understand it. You are not in charge here. Your title means nothing. Your power means nothing. You are my prisoner, and I can do with you what I please. Your life is in my hands. Victor spoke, slowly tightening his grip on Deathbird's throat. Now, do you understand things as they have been explained to you? I said, do you understand me? Victor asked once more, his grip on Deathbird's throat getting even tighter. So much so black spots began to appear in her eyes from the lack of oxygen. Don't make me repeat myself again. Why? Yes. Deathbird managed to squeeze out of her mouth. Yes, what? Victor asked. I understand, you. Deathbird spoke. I understand you what? Victor asked. Go on and say it. What's my name? Doom. Understand, you Doom. Deathbird spoke. You're goddamn right you understand me, Victor said. He then released his grip on Deathbird's throat, allowing her to fall to the floor, where she began gasping for air. As she did, Victor looked down at her, a disgusted expression on her face. "Pathetic," he said. "And you claim to be the heir to the throne of this Shi'ar empire. If that is the case, then I worry for your civilization." He spoke. Upon this, Deathbird clenched her hands and grit her teeth, wanting nothing more to rip Victor to pieces. But she didn't even try, since she knew it truly be a futile endeavor now. To think I would encounter such a powerful being on a no-name planet like this. Deathbird thought. No, wait. This is an opportunity. If I can get this powerful primitive warrior on my side, then I can take back what is rightfully mine from that pathetic brother of mine. Now the only question is, how do I sway him to me? Deathbird quickly searched her thoughts of a way to get into Victor's good graces. Then one in particular crossed her mind, bringing a small smile to her face. Yes, that's it, Deathbird thought. She then moved to put her plan into action. Crawling on her hands and knees, she arrived in front of Victor. When she did so, Victor looked down at Deathbird. "What are you doing?" he asked her. "Offering myself to you, O mighty warrior." Deathbird spoke. "What do you mean?" Victor asked, since he has no idea where Deathbird was coming from. As a part of our culture, we Shi'ar are taught to marry other cultures in order to grow stronger. We are also taught to submit to those who prove themselves to be greater warriors than us. You, Victor Werner von Doom, have met both qualifications. Thus I submit myself to you in mind and body, as per Shi'ar law. For if I, a member of the royal family, does not follow our laws, then what fight do I have to rule my people? Deathbird spoke. She then looked up at Victor, a cramped, submissive expression on her face. "If you have no issues accepting me, then please go ahead," she spoke. Victor finally understanding what Deathbird was up to. She was trying to honeypot him. Since although what he knew her to be saying is true, since he remembered that about the Shi'ar thanks to the memories of his past life, he also knew Deathbird would never follow such traditions and rules unless it would benefit her. Because from what Victor could recall from her personality in his previous life, besides her anger issues, was that Deathbird was cunning and ruthless and would pounce on anyone the instant she saw them show any weakness. That's why Victor was trying to show her he had none. But it seems she still wasn't getting the moment. Though he does admire her determination. And since she's offering herself to him, this is a really bad idea, Victor thought. Recalling exactly the type of intergalactic Game of Thrones bullshit the Shi'ar royal family gets into, and knowing that if he sticks his D in Deathbird, he would become involved whether he wants to or not. Not to mention the fact that she's certifiably crazy. But for some reason to Victor that makes her even hotter in his eyes, and makes him want her even more. So, oh darn it, Victor muttered. He's going to get him some Deathbird coochie. Picking Deathbird up, Victor took her over to the cell bed, to give her exactly what she was asking her. Victor, POV, a refreshed smile on my face, I climbed out of Deathbird bed. The latter still in it, covered from head to toe in bodily fluids, a look of pure bliss on her face. Despite the glare she is trying to send my way. Which makes no sense, since I simply gave her what she basically asked for. It's her own fault for not being prepared for what was to come. But that's what she gets for trying to honeypot me. Which would never even work on me in the first place. Since coochie will never be Doom's downfall. Moving on. Using magic, I cleaned myself up. Then Deathbird as well, since I am nothing if not a courteous lover. Once I finished doing this, I got dressed and left her cell, which is located in my laboratory facility, housed in my created pocket dimension. After this, I headed to a meeting room where I found my Primarchs waiting for me. Since I had told them to assemble here and wait until I finished my interrogation of Deathbird, so I could relay all I learned to them. The moment they saw me, all of them put wet smiles on their faces. "What's wrong with all of you?" I asked. "They heard you smashing the brains out of the hot bird avian-like prisoner, my emperor." Brainiac spoke up. "Oh." I mused. "Huh? I didn't think either of us were that loud." Then again, my mind was focused on other things than the volume of our voices, so yeah. My liege, I mean no disrespect, but was having adult relations with the prisoner the wisest move? Katma asked me. Possibly not, but she offered in the first place, and I don't regret my actions. I replied. Especially given why she offered herself to me in the first place. I said. I then used my telepathy to connect to the minds of my Primarchs and shared with them all the information I had obtained from Deathbird's mind when I was with her earlier. Since I definitely had more on my mind than impressing upon her the reality of her situation, and smashing her down when she offered. As I always say, Business before pleasure. Upon learning with Deathbird offered herself to me, all my Primarchs became visibly angry. But they quickly reined it in and dismissed it, once they realized I understood her plan the moment she enacted it, and then immediately turned the tables on her. My Emperor, please forgive my earlier statement. Katma spoke. I waved her off. It's fine. Just focus on the information I am sending you, of which there is a lot. From the entire history of the Shi'ar Empire, to their technological and other scientific achievements, to their status in the known galaxy, as well as information on the other members of the royal family, which, as far as Deathbird knows, includes only 3 others at the moment. The current Emperor and all-around Playboy Ken, Charles Xavier Alien Sugar Mommy Liliandra. Finally there is Ken adopted son, Gabriel Summers aka Vulcan. So that asshole does exist in this reality. I thought. Good to know. Once I got through all that, I gave my Primarchs a rundown of the Shi'ar military capabilities. Specifically with regard to the Shi'ar Imperial Guard and their centuries-old leader, one of the few guys in comics I knew to be able to rock a mohawk, and one of Marvel's many parody characters of DC Comics Superman, Gladiator. That finishing off all information I got from Deathbird with regard to her people and home. Then after doing so I related to my Primarchs the only other important information I took from Deathbird's mind, which was with regard to the other galactic superpowers known to her, which are as follows. The Kree, the Skrull, who in this reality are in line with their comic book versions and not their MCU versions. Good to know. Now I know I must enact my plans I made in regards to the Skrulls to make sure I don't end up dealing with either a Super Skrull or any secret invasion bullshit. Thanos territory. Galactus territory. Yeah, Galactus has actual territory, which I find to be both a good and bad thing. The Nova Empire. Then finally, there is the Spartacian Empire, which makes me wonder which version of Star-Lord will appear in this reality. The one from the MCU or the one from the comics. Though in all honesty, I prefer the latter to the former. But that's just me. After giving all this information to my Primarchs, I closed my telepathic connection with them, and allowed them a few seconds to process what they all now knew. Wow, I knew the galaxy was a big place, but it seems I was limiting my imagination. Thrag spoke. You can say that again, Thrag. Thaddeus spoke. To think such mighty empires and beings who rule them exist. Ivy muttered. That just means we must prepare even more for if and when the time comes that we must face them. Katma spoke. Katma speaks the truth. Zod added. Especially since it seems our Emperor has already set his sights on the Shi'ar this Deathbird hails from. He said. Am I right to assume that my Emperor? You are Zod. I replied. But of course that will be several years from now, since we are nowhere near ready to go up against the Shi'ar. They currently beat us in all categories that matter. But only for now. Soon that will not be the case, and once it isn't, their empire shall belong to Doom. Well, that's all I needed to inform you all of. I'll be taking my leave now. I spoke. Oh, and if Deathbird should give you any trouble while I am gone, you have my permission to smack her around. Since I don't want her thinking she can get arrogant just because I am not around. Yes, Emperor. All 5 of them replied in unison. One more thing. Zod, did the search you and the Doombots conducted at the site of Deathbird landing zone turn up anything? Nothing at all, my Emperor. Zod replied. Which is good. Since I don't want Shi'ar technology of any kind falling into the hands of anyone else here on Earth. They wouldn't even truly know what to do with it anyway. Okay. I replied. I then took my leave, heading to my person chambers in Castle Doom using a portal, where I quickly showered and changed into some pristine clothing, since I had a meeting scheduled for this morning. Once I was prepared, I headed back to my office at the Latverian Embassy in New York, checking the time immediately after I did, which read 8:50 a.m., meaning I had still had 10 minutes before my meeting was set to begin. It also meant I was riding Deathbird for several hours. Oh well. Taking a seat in my chair, I telepathically reached out to Jessica and informed her I had returned, since I informed her of my departure last night, in case I needed her to run interference with Susan. Since although what we shared last night was amazing, I am not delusional enough to believe I can trust her with half the things I have in motion. At least not yet. Last night being a good first step to making that a reality. The next 10 minutes passed by quickly. Then once 9 a.m. came, I heard a knock on my office door. King Victor, your 9 o'clock appointment is here. Jessica said from outside my doors. Excellent. Please, send him in. I said. Yes. Jessica replied. She then opened the door and my appointment stepped inside my office. 1 Otto Octavius. Insert image of Otto Octavius / Dr. Octopus here. After he did, Jessica closed the door and Otto walked up to my desk. When he reached it, I stood up and offered him my left hand, which he shook. Dr. Octavius, a pleasure to meet you. I said. The same to you, King Victor. Especially since I hear you're a scientist yourself. Otto said. That I am. I replied. The two of us then broke our handshake and took our seats. So I'm certainly curious as to why a man of your stature requested a meeting with a man like me? Otto asked. Getting straight to business. I like that. Well, I heard about your work. Your plan to build a sustainable fusion reactor from some contacts of mine. I think it's a brilliant and wonderful idea, and I invited you here today to tell you I personally wish to fund the project. I spoke. Partly because I don't want this version of Otto to end up as Dr. Octopus, and partly because having his technology under my control would be a huge boon, as well as having the man himself in my corner. Truly? Otto asked me. I nodded my head. Yes, I truly wish to fund your research. Because if you can make vision a reality, it can change the world as we know it. It could solve humanity's energy crisis and make the use of fossil fuels obsolete. Not to mention how it could expand our knowledge of physics in general. To have the power of the sun in the palm of our hands. It would be glorious. Yes, exactly. Otto said. No, Dr. Doom, it's like you're heading my mind. Why, thank you, Doctor. I replied. But I'm not reading his actual mind at the moment. It's meta-knowledge for the win here. So in regards to my offer, I do have some stipulations. Namely that you and your wife relocate to Latveria to conduct your research and become teachers at the Werner Academy. I spoke. I see. Otto replied. I'll have to discuss this with my wife. I completely understand. I replied. The two of us then discussed a few more things before we ended the meeting, and Otto went on his way. After he did, I couldn't help but begin humming the spectacular Spider-Man theme song. After my meeting with Otto ended, I did some quick work. That is until I could sense Susan awakening, due to the many surveillance spells I have placed all over the embassy. The moment I sensed this, I stopped what I was doing and headed back to my personal bedroom. Susan having fully awoken just as I arrived and entered the room. Hey, good morning. I told her. Yeah, good morning, Victor. Susan replied. She then used her left hand to stifle a yawn. You're up early. Yeah, I had an early morning meeting. The life of a monarch. I spoke. Right. Susan replied. So, about last night. Yes, I enjoyed it. I instantly replied, putting a smug grin on my face. Susan lightly blushing when she saw it. Which makes no sense considering what she did to me last night using her mouth. Seems she's a freak between the sheets. So this proves what my father told me in my last life to be true. It's always the quiet ones you need to watch out for. So did I. But that's not what I was going to speak on. Susan said. I was going to ask you if what happened between us is all right. We're two consenting adults, so yeah. What happened between us was just fine. I said. No, I mean you're a king. Susan spoke. True, but I'm still a person. A person with wants and desires. And for the longest time for me, you've been a subject in both those categories, Susan. I told her. I then walked over to her, took her face gently in my hands, and then leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her lips. So there's no reason to fill that pretty and wonderfully intelligent head of yours with any unnecessary thoughts. I said. Now, are we good? I asked her. Yes, we are. Susan replied, putting a smile on her face. Glad to hear it. I said. Once I did, Susan got freshened up and put her clothes from yesterday on. After she did, I escorted her to the dining hall for some brunch, which I had already had prepared. As we ate, we chatted about numerous things, until eventually breakfast came to an end and Susan got ready to take her leave. Well, I guess I'll be seeing you, Susan said. Yes, you definitely will, I replied. I then gave Susan another kiss, after which she took her leave of the embassy. Then once she did, I returned to my office and began reviewing my Reed Richards extermination plans to make sure they were completely and utterly flawless. Since there's no telling what he might do when he's discovered I've taken Susan for myself. keeping her out of his worthless hands. I don't want, or need, to deal with a version of the Maker in this reality. After I made sure the plans were flawless, I made a couple more just in case. Since when it comes to Richards, I need to make sure he is absolutely gone for good. There can be no mistakes when it comes to taking him out. Because if I give that cockroach even an inch, he'll take a mile. When my new plans for dealing with Reed were completed, I leaned back in my chair and took a short reprieve. I then informed Jessica telepathically I was heading out again. Once I did, I opened up a portal and stepped through it, arriving at Kamar Taj. I figured since I'm in New York, I'd visit it, considering it was one of the places that helped me become the man that I am today. Plus I want to see my master, the Ancient One, and catch up a bit. Closing my portal behind me, I ignored the looks the newer members of the Order were giving me. It's all right, everyone. He is welcome here. Which stopped as soon as the Ancient One walked into the courtyard and basically told everyone to stand down. So they went back to what they were doing. Meanwhile, I walked up to the Ancient One and gave her a slight bow of respect. Master. Victor, or perhaps I should call you Dr. Doom now. The Ancient One spoke. Whatever you prefer. I replied. So, how have you been? The same as always. She replied. Though it seems the same cannot be said for you. It certainly cannot. I said. Anyway, may we move our conversation somewhere a little more private? There are many things I wish to discuss with you of a personal nature. Of course. The Ancient One replied. She then started walking and I followed behind her. The two of us eventually ending up seated in a private meeting room. Once we were, I conjured forth a teapot and 2 teacups on saucers. Tea. Yes, thank you. The Ancient One replied. I then prepared her a cup of tea before preparing one for myself. After I did, the two of us simply sat in silence for a moment, both enjoying our drinks, until the Ancient One spoke up again. It seems you have been quite busy since the last time we conversed. Yes, I have. I replied. I even now have one of my children like you said I would. His name is Christoph. And I'd love for you to meet him. I spoke. In fact, I have several people I would like you to meet, including 2 young ladies whose innate magical potential, if properly trained and nurtured, would allow them to take up your position as Sorcerer Supreme of Earth one day. Well, they certainly sound interesting. Now I more than ever want to meet them. Along with your first child. The Ancient One replied. Excellent. I said. Then when you have a chance, please come to Latveria. You always have an open invitation to visit my country. On that note, I wonder if I might ask you if any members of the Order would be interested in becoming instructors at the Werner Academy. Since right now the school only has one magical teacher, and he's unique to say the least. But he knows his magic. Still, with things growing as they are, the school, and by extension by domain, need more experienced users in the mystic arts. Especially since I am far too busy to teach. Unless it's private and personal lessons. Like I have begun doing with Christoph. Since it turns out he has an aptitude for the mystic arts. Looks like I'll make a mini Doom out of him yet. First off, thank for the invitation, and I will take you up on it. Secondly, as to your request, I will make some inquiries. The Ancient One spoke. But Victor, those that I send to assist you will only be there to teach and defend the innocent. They will not aid you with any of your other plans. She said. The Ancient One revealing she knows about my machinations. But I expected nothing less from her. That's fine. I wasn't going to ask them to be involved with those matters anyway. I replied. On that note, what do you truly think of my plans? I asked, looking the Ancient One directly in her eyes when I did, ignoring the subtle tension that appeared in the air. For I need an answer to this question. Since I don't feel the Ancient One and the Order would stand against me, but I cannot be too careful. So depending on how she answers my question, steps may have to be taken. For as I always say, none shall stand in the way of doom. I won't stand in your way. She easily answered. Truly? I asked. Yes, truly. She replied. For although I have seen much bloodshed occurring due to the path you have chosen, Victor the First have also seen the bright future you create as well. That is why I will never stand against you. Unless you fall too far. I see. And what do you consider too far? I questioned. I'll leave that up to your imagination. The Ancient One replied, giving me a smirk. The tension in the air disappearing. Well, that's good to know. I said. Now then, let's continue. I have a gift for you. I spoke. I then reached into my pocket and took out a vial of the ambrosia serum. This serum will bring your aging process to almost a complete standstill and give you a few other boosts, allowing you to live for a few centuries. It will also keep you as you are now, so you no longer have to draw energy from the dark dimension to stay as you are. I explained. Since I want the Ancient One to understand exactly what I'm saying. I want to save her life. She's been good to me, and is someone I've come to care for. So there's no way I'm letting her fall on her sword just because she's foreseen it. Yeah, damn that shit. Strange can still be great, even if the Ancient One doesn't die. Not to mention now she has many more candidates to choose from to take up her position should she ever truly fall. So that future she saw is no longer set in stone. Thank you, Victor. Truly. The Ancient One spoke. You're not going to ask me how I know about your connection to the dark dimension? I asked her. I foreseen you won't tell me no matter how I ask you, even if by force. So I'll just take your gift. She explained. I see. I replied. Good. So that only leaves one last thing on the table. If you will allow me, I would like to study the Eye of Agamotto, since it's one of the only things I know of in existence that can contain the power of an infinity stone and allow a person to wield it without being consumed by said stone's innate powers, which is definitely something I will need, since I have already decided to collect all the infinity stones to keep them out of Thanos and any other psychopath's hands. You may. The Ancient One replied. Thank you. I replied to her. The two of us then discussed a few more things before our talks came to an end. Once they did, I injected the Ancient One with the ambrosia serum and then returned back to the New York Latverian embassy, where I got back to work. Since there is no rest for the wicked. April 28, 2008. Beep beep beep. Hearing her alarm go off, Lucia reached out from under her covers and turned it off. Once she did, she then took a few moments to truly wake up, enjoying the comfort of lying in bed during the PCOS. Though she was fully awake, Lucia climbed out of bed and got ready for her day, which included washing up, getting dressed, and enjoying her morning cup of coffee out on her apartment balcony. One which gave her a full view of Latveria capital city Dumstat, a place that had drastically changed ever since Victor had become the nation's sovereign ruler close to 2 years ago. It had become better than Lucia could have ever imagined, even during her wildest dreams. Dumstat was now the shining beacon of Latveria, a city of hope, of progress, which made Lucia felt honored to live in it every day, as well as work to keep running and growing. Given her job as the Latverian Prime Minister, leisurely Lucia finished her cup of coffee. She then made a quick breakfast for herself before leaving her apartment to start her day. The two Dumbots that accompanied her everywhere she went, since Victor had assigned them as her bodyguards, joining her. Exiting her apartment building, Lucia found her usual hover car waiting outside. Yes, a hover car. A vehicle that used anti-grav technology to function and maneuver, which Victor had ordered into production when he returned from his last trip to New York in the US at the beginning of the month. Since he wanted to start ridding Latveria of anything that relied on fossil fuels, including vehicles. The car Lucia is using is one of the first off the line. As Lucia walked over to the hover car, its cockpit shield rose up, revealing the Prime Minister's pilot/assistant/organic bodyguard, Yelena Belova. Insert image of Yelena Belova here, the younger sister of the head of the Irinis, Natasha Romanoff, who was assigned to work with Lucia on orders from Natasha. After Victor had requested she supply Lucia with a bodyguard. So when Natasha asked her people, Yelena was the first to jump at the opportunity, and now here the two ladies are. Morning, boss lady. So where to today? Yelena asked Lucia, who had gotten into the hover car and strapped herself in. We've got a full plate today, Yelena. Lucia replied, having gotten used to the antics of the younger woman during the past month, ever since they had been put together, which at first Lucia didn't like at all. But after Victor explained his reasons for doing so, which was because he was going to begin some of his more aggressive plans into action, Lucia didn't protest anymore, since she knew just what sort of danger Victor's drastic plans might incur. Understood. Yelena replied. Once she did, the two got on their way. The cockpit shield of the hover car lowered. Then Yelena put it into drive, so to speak, and took off. The two Dumbots using their jets to fly and trail behind them. Eventually the trio reached their first destination, a large greenhouse facility. Exiting the hover car, Yelena and Lucia entered it, along with the two Doombot bodyguards. As they moved through the facility, they passed numerous individuals working. Some scientists, some not. Until eventually they arrived at an office, where they found one Maya Hansen working inside, since she was in charge of the entire greenhouse facility, due to the fact it was the key to a project Victor had assigned her after helping her complete her version of the Extremis serum, which was known as Project Demeter, a plan that involved using the Extremis serum to engineer crops that could grow in any sort of environment, allowing people to grow food anywhere in the world where they lived. Put simply, Project Demeter was a plan to end world hunger, as well as a way to provide Latveria with a steady and limitless supply of food, should they need it in the future. Dr. Hansen, how are you today? Lucia spoke up, turning Maya's attention away from the holographic screen in front of her, which showcased an article about the still missing Tony Stark. Since back in February, while performing a weapons tests in conjunction with the US military in Afghanistan, Tony's convoy had been attacked on their return trip. Now he was missing and presumed dead, which had placed Maya on edge these past few months. After all, despite Tony's personality, he was still the father of her child. A child he doesn't even know he had. Maya thought, having started to feel guilty about not telling Tony about Maya. So she promised herself that the moment she found out he was okay, she was going to contact him and tell the man the truth about having a daughter. Letting the chips fall where they may. Oh, I'm okay. Maya hastily replied. Sorry, was our meeting today? It is, Lucia replied, her gaze noticing what was on Maya's holographic screen. But I can see your mind is preoccupied with other things. So we can reschedule for another day. Really, thank you. Also, sorry. Maya spoke. It's fine, Maya. Truly. Lucia replied. I mean, the father of your child is missing and presumed dead. It would be strange if you weren't a little disorganized over that information. But since your overall work hasn't suffered, all is well. She spoke. Once she did so, Maya and Lucia quickly set a new meeting date to discuss the progress of Project Demeter. Then she and Yelena left the facility to continue on with the rest of their rounds for the day. Her eyes darting back and forth, Lorna Dane couldn't believe what she was seeing outside of the window she was sitting next to, on the bus she was on. Insert image of Lorna Dane/Polaris here. She also couldn't even really believe her own situation. Because just 3 days ago she was sleeping on the streets, having run away from home after having enough of her aunt lying to her about her, where she came from, specifically who her biological father was, since she had revealed her mother's husband, Arnold, was not. But no matter how much Lorna asked her aunt for her true father's name, she wouldn't give it, even when she gained powers, like those mutants she had heard about. So with that being the final straw, Laura left to search for her father on her own, quickly finding herself homeless. That is until a group of mysterious strangers had approached her and displayed abilities like her own, telling her they could take her to a safe place where her gifts would be accepted and she wouldn't have to hide. Not that Lorna could hide anyway, given her hair was naturally green. Though she loved it, it made it obvious to everyone she was different. But now, here in his place, which she learned was known as Latveria, she knew that wouldn't matter, since she saw people with powers using them outside of the bus windows she was on, and no one was looking at them in disgust or harassing them. Did she forget to mention the bus was floating? This place is incredible, Lorna muttered to herself. Then a few moments after she did, the hovering bus she was on came to a stop in front of a large building. Okay, everyone off and inside, their driver said. So all those in the bus, who were either kids like Lorna or teenagers, got off and headed inside of the building in front of them as their bus driver instructed. After doing so, they were met by more people who split them up into even smaller groups, until only Lorna was left standing next to a boy her own age, who sported rand skin and blonde hair. Hey there. Name's Alex Summers, and you are? The boy asked. Insert image of Alex Summers/Havoc here, Lorna Dane. She replied. So any idea why they separated us from the others? I can answer that, a woman walking up to them said, drawing both Lorna and Alex's attention to her. Do you both remember that medical checkup you went through upon being brought to Latveria? Both of them nodded. As soon as they arrived in country, they were taken to a hospital and given full medical checkups, while also being infected with a golden-like serum everyone called ambrosia. Well, that wasn't to make sure you were in good health, but we also took samples of your DNA to put it into our system and see if you both have any relatives in country. Turns out you do. What? Alex shouted. We have family. Lorna questioned. You do. And if you'll both please follow me, I'll introduce you to the family members we've located for each of you. Both groups being quite small, which is why you two were put together. The woman explained. She then started walking. Alex and Lorna following behind her. Both nervous. Lorna in particular, since she might be about to meet the father she has left home to find. The three walked for some time until they reached a door. When they did so, the woman opened it and stepped inside. Alex and Lorna following her, finding themselves inside of a rec room where three kids about their own age were seated at one of the tables. Who were Pietro, Wanda, and Scott. Alex shouted, his eyes landing on the last kid in the room, who was a boy, with brown hair, wearing red-lensed sunglasses. His name Scott Summers. Insert image of Scott Summers / Cyclops here, Alex. Scott cried, running up to him and engulfing him in a hug. I thought you were dead, he muttered, as tears began streaming down his face. Me too, bro. Me too, Alex replied, tears streaming down his face as well. The two brothers getting lost in their reunion. Meanwhile, Lorna was approached by Pietro and Wanda. So, I'm Lorna. Lorna told them. I'm Wanda. Wanda spoke. Pietro said. Seems like you're our sister, he said. Apparently we all share the same dad. Is he around? No. In fact, we actually don't know who our father is, Wanda replied, making Lorna dejected. Oh, she murmured. But even so, it's nice to meet you. And if you want, we can be family, Wanda said. Yeah, what our sister said. Pietro spoke. Our sister, huh? Lorna muttered, feeling a warmth in her chest. Sure, she still may not know who her father is, but at least now she knows she's not alone. And that's the best feeling of all. So a quick rundown of some of the characters' ages. Current year, 2008 Lorna Dane. 12 years old Alex Summers. 13 years old. Scott Summers. 14 years old. Pietro and Wanda Maximoff. 14 years old Christophe Renard Doom. 12 years old. Kentucky, United States of America. May 2, 2008. Third person, POV. Get out here, you filthy mutants. It's all his fault. Come out, muties. If only he had listened. Then his family wouldn't be in danger right now. There wouldn't be men with guns and torches outside his house. Disgusting freaks. Get out here right now. His siblings wouldn't be crying in the corner in fear. And his dad wouldn't be aiming the barrel of the family shotgun at the door to their house, just waiting for the angry mob outside to enter, so he could shoot them and protect them. These and other thoughts ran through Samuel Guthrie's mind as he looked in between the closed blinds of one of the front window of his house. Insert image of Samuel Guthrie / Cannonball here, watching as an angry mob stood before it. A group of men from an organization known as the Friends of Humanity, who hated and hunted mutants, which he and many of his siblings were. But their parents, and even their siblings without powers, didn't care that Sam and some of his other siblings had powers. They loved them anyway. Though Sam's parents always told him and his siblings with powers never to use them in public, which is a rule Sam broke the other day, when he was walking home from school and saw a little girl run out into the street and about to be hit by a truck. He used his powers and saved her. But then afterwards, the looks he got made Sam feel like he was some kind of monster. Immediately when he got home, he told his family everything that happened. And while they praised him for saving that girl, he couldn't help but notice the fearful look in his parents' eyes. Tonight, right now, he understood why they got that look. And it's all because of me, Sam muttered to himself. Maybe if I give myself, they'll let everyone else go. Sam spoke, mustering up his resolve to sacrifice himself for his family. But before he could, red beams suddenly shot down from the sky and carved up all the angry mob outside of his home, leaving the once screamed-filled air deadly silent, along with the once clean ground littered with blood and body parts. What the hell? Sam shouted, only to get a slap upside the head from his mom. Language Samuel. But honey, he's right. What just happened out there? Thomas Guthrie spoke. Then right after he did, a figure descended from the air and landed on the ground right in front of the Guthrie family home door. The figure then walked up to the door and gently knocked on it, stunning the entire family. But that didn't last long, as the mysterious figure outside knocked again, bringing the Guthrie family out of their stupor. When this happened, Thomas carefully approached the front door and then opened it, instantly aiming for barrel of his shotgun at the person on the other side. Who was Zod? That will not be necessary, Mr. Guthrie. Zod said. How do you know my name? Who are you? Thomas asked. My name is Zod. Zod replied. And like several of your children, I have special abilities. He spoke. Zod then began floating in the air. Are you the one who saved us? Jay asked. I am. Zod replied. And if you all come with me, I can take you to a place where men like the ones who just stood outside your home and hated you because of a few simple differences do not exist. He explained. Oh, and what might be the name of this place? Thomas asked. My home country. A place called Latveria. Zod replied. A smile on his face after he did. Mississippi, United States of America. Ag. Irene Adler suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs, twisting and turning in her bed. Insert image of Irene Adler/Destiny here. Eventually she began flailing uncontrollably, until suddenly she stopped. Sweat covering her entire body, she panted heavily, having just had one of the strongest visions of her entire life. Since Irene is no ordinary woman. No, she is one who possesses the ability of prophetic dreams and visions. The one she just turned pertaining to a signal individual, a man named Dr. Doom. After recovering from her vision, Irene sat up in her bed. The moment she did so, the bedroom door opened and her daughter/legal ward entered it. A 14-year-old goth girl by the name of Anna Marie. But most people refer to her as Rogue. Insert image of X-Men Evolution Anna Marie/Rogue here. Ma, is everything okay? Rogue asked Irene. Yes, my dear. Irene replied. However, I must inform you that we are going on a trip. What, why? And where? Rogue asked. Because going to this place will ensure a bright future for us both. As to where, it is a place known as Latveria. Irene spoke, hoping her lover would see reason in her decision, since it would very well mean the difference between her living and dying. Kunar, Afghanistan, May 5, 2008. Moving through the tunnel in his armor, Tony came to a stop when he noticed Ensign lying on several sacks, bleeding. Ensign! Tony shouted towards his friend. As did the Ten Rings leader, Wazir got ready to fire a rocket at Tony, only for a bullet to go right through the back of his head and come out right between his eyes in the front. Noticing this, both Tony and Ensign looked in Wazir's direction, just as his body hit the ground. While just outside the cave, several people in strange armor, carrying strange weaponry neither Tony nor Ensign had ever seen before, descended from the sky using ropes and started killing all members of the Ten Rings in sight. Who the hell are they? Tony asked. No idea. Ensign replied. Just as he did so, several of the strange soldiers ran into the tunnel towards Tony and Ensign, putting Tony on guard. He readied his weapons, only for the soldiers who ran into the cave to stop, while one of them stepped forward, the others training their weapons on Tony. My name is Master Chief John Shepard of the Latverian Defense Force. The one who stepped forward quickly spoke. On orders from our king and sovereign, we've been sent here to aid and assist both Tony Stark and Ho Ensign. He explained. Now then, Mr. Stark, please stand down. I really don't want my men to shoot you. Okay, how do you know it's me in the armor? Better question is, how can we trust anything you people are saying? Tony asked. When he did so, John reached into his armor and pulled out a phone. He then turned it in the direction of Ensign and Tony, revealing none other than Tony Ho on the screen. Tony. Ensign shouted in utter shock. You know her, Ensign? Tony asked. She's my daughter. He admitted, though he hadn't seen her in years. He and Tony's mother drifted apart. Then he started a new family and never got in touch with either of them again. Though after the rest of his family had been killed and he had been captured, he promised himself he would reconnect with Tony if he got out alive. Hey Dad, Tony said. Listen, I don't have a lot of time, but I can tell you these people are here to help you and Mr. Stark. I swear it. So you can trust them. She spoke. Okay, Ensign said. Tony, stand down. Ensign sputtered. Ensign. Tony shouted. Medics in here now. John shouted over his comms. The medics then rushed inside the cave and began working on Ensign, Tony deciding to trust his friend's judgment. suddenly recalling why Latveria sounded so familiar. It was run by that genius Victor Von Doom. Makes Tony wonder if he could become king of a country as well. North Salem, New York City, United States. Sitting in a wheelchair, on an extended platform in the middle of a spherical room, was a man wearing a helmet with wires connecting it to the terminal situated directly in front of the man, whose name is Charles Francis Xavier. Insert image of Charles Xavier / Professor X here. One of the most powerful telepaths on planet Earth, as well as a man who gained his powers through the awakening of his X gene. Fascinated by this, Charles decided to dedicate his life to the study of those with X gene-based powers, which he has termed mutants, as well as helping those like him learn to control their abilities, and work to make a world where mutants can live however they wish, without being hated or feared. Those, and several other reasons, are why he created a school and formed a team known as the X-Men. Now as to what Charles is doing at the moment, he is using a device that amplifies his already incredible psychic powers, which makes it easier for him to track and locate mutants. The machine's name, Cerebro. The reason? It's because in the past month Charles has noticed several mutants he had been observing, and oftentimes their families, completely and utterly disappearing, making the man worried. Since if someone was actively targeting mutants and their families, they needed to be stopped immediately. That's why Charles was once again using Cerebro to try and locate those missing mutants and their families. But no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find them. Just what could I be missing? Charles asked himself, racking his brain, trying to figure out a solution to the problem in front of him. That's when he recalled a particular detail. After doing so, Charles removed his Cerebro helmet, then left Cerebro's chamber. He then moved through the halls of the X-Men underground facilities to get to the elevator that would take him back up to the main mansion, which also functioned as the school. Entering the elevator, he rode it up, then got off when it reached his destination. Charles then began wheeling himself around, until he found the person he was looking for. Logan. The man being outside, laying in a hammock, which he stopped doing the moment Xavier rolled up in front of him. "What do you need, Chuck?" Logan asked. "You told me some time ago about how your daughter, and several other mutants are attending a school on the nation of Latveria, correct?" Charles asked. "Yeah," Logan replied. "But like I told you before, Chuck, I can't talk about the details." That was the one stipulation Victor had made to Logan in regards to his visits to Latveria to spend time with Laura, which would immediately be cut off should he violate the term he was given. Logan knew Victor was serious, so he never violated it. But he gave Xavier what details he could, when he revealed to the man he had a daughter. "The details don't concern me," Charles replied. "Truthfully, I've come to ask you to see if you could set up a meeting between me and the monarch of Latveria." "What, why?" Logan asked. "As you well know, several mutants and their families have gone missing, and that number is growing every day. And I'm not close to find any leads to the cause. But I figured if the king of Latveria is a friend to mutants, then he may be able to aid me in my investigation," Charles explained. "Evo. Huh?" Charles questioned. "In Latveria, people like us are referred to as EVO, which stands for Evolved Human," Logan explained. "A term created by the monarch, Victor Von Doom." He spoke. "The man you want to meet, Chuck, who actually wants to meet you too." "He does?" Charles asked. Logan nodded. "Yeah. Told me to set up a meeting between you two the moment you asked," Logan revealed. "I see," Charles replied, his mind wondering exactly how his meeting with this Victor Von Doom would go. He could only hope it was a fruitful one. Unknown location. Staring out at the landscape before him, the man known Magneto was lost in his thoughts. Insert image of Magneto here. That is until he sensed someone approaching him from behind. Turning, Magneto saw it was his second in command, and one of his most dedicated followers, Fabian Cortez. Insert image of Fabian Cortez. Fabian. Magneto mused. "Magneto, sir," Fabian replied, getting on one knee and bowing his head to Magneto briefly, before lifting it up. "I have obtained the information you have been seeking, the location of the missing mutants," he said. Since Magneto and his followers had suddenly noticed mutants going missing in large numbers over a month ago. When they did, Magneto vowed to get to the bottom of this, since he would not allow his second people to suffer the indignities of his first. No more. Never again, Magneto thought, cleaning his fists. "Where are our missing brethren?" Magneto asked. We've traces them to a small Eastern European country. The one that has been on the news quite a bit on the last few years. Latveria. Fabian spoke. I see. Magneto replied, thinking that once again another European country was going after his people. Not on my watch. Magneto muttered. Fabian, prepare our forces. We're heading to Latveria. Yes, sir. Fabian replied, a smile on his face, along with a crazed and worship-like glint in his eyes that Magneto failed to notice. Unknown location. Standing in a sophisticated laboratory, a man stood in front of a screen, with an angry expression on his face. The man in question didn't even look human. He had pure white skin, a red gem in the center of his forehead, and his body looked almost metallic in several areas. The name of this man is Nathaniel Essex, though for a long time he has gone by another name. Mr. Sinister. Insert image of Nathaniel Essex / Mr. Sinister here, due to certain circumstances he encountered. Moving on. The reasons Mr. Sinister was angry was due to the fact several mutants he had been monitoring just disappeared, including one that was a big part in one of his greatest plans. A boy by the name of Scott Summers. For years Sinister had been carefully molding Scott to suit his needs, without the boy himself even realizing it. But now all that was in jeopardy, since he couldn't find a trace of Scott anywhere. Not to mention Sinister felt someone had removed the telepathic suggestions he had implanted deep in Scott's mind. A/N, yeah, that actually happened on the comics. Sinister is that horrible. Damn it. Sinister shouted. Who cares interfere with me? He asked. Then after Sinister did, the computer terminal in front of him pinged. When it did, he began looking at the results. Since he had put together a search algorithm to try and determine the location of Scott and the others he was observing. As he finished reading the results of his algorithm, Sinister couldn't help but grin, since now he had the most likely location of his subjects. A place called Latveria. To think third world country would step into my business. Sinister mused, since he didn't really think that highly of Latveria. Inferior Homo sapiens. Sinister shouted. Time for them to learn what happens when you get in the way of Sinister, he said, chuckling to himself afterwards. Sinister having no idea the shitstorm he was about to create for himself. Latveria, Dumstadt, May 8, 2008. Victor POV, my holographic screen active in front of me, I sat in my personal office within Castle Doom, reviewing several reports from the past week that I had put off doing, since I was working on personal projects in my laboratory facility. But now I am all business, which is usually how I do things. 1 week of personal time, 1 week of business time. Unless something major happens during either time period. It works for me. Plus I can do it since I'm in charge and basically make the rules. Boy, it's good to be emperor. Trailing through the reports, I quickly got through the most boring and routine ones before moving on to the good stuff. First up, the status of Project Safe Haven. A project I had been planning to implement for some time, but finally did upon the return from my last trip to the United States. The project itself involving locating EVOs all across the globe and bringing them, and in some cases, their families here to Latveria, making them citizens of my country, as well as allowing them to live their lives properly and train them to use their powers. As I looked through last week's report on the project's ongoing efforts, I find one section in particular very interesting. The fact that Zod not only saved Samuel Guthrie aka Cannonball, but also his entire family from an angry mob composed of members from the so-called Friends of Humanity. More like the cockroaches of humanity. Those ignorant, bigoted bastards. I can't wait until I'm able to purge the entire earth of people like them. Reading the report to the end, I saw Zod manage to get the entire family to relocate here to Latveria. Good. With that report out of the way, I moved on to the one detailing the status of the various scientific projects currently being worked on in country, such as Project Demeter being headed by Dr. Hansen, along with the likes of the Fusion Reactor Project being headed by the Octavius couple, who accepted my offer to come work in Latveria before I left the US, and have been in country since the beginning of April. The couple slowly but surely falling in love with the place. I've seen it when I've had a chance to chat with them. This makes me extremely happy, since it means the Octavius couple is almost firmly in my corner. Finishing up that report, I moved on to the one concerning the production and distribution of adamantium and vibranium A in country. Both metals Latveria now has abundant access to, all thanks to me cracking the PIM particle formula, and then using said particles to grow small chunks of both metals into giant chunks that are being used to meet my country needs, along with my personal ones. Everything on that report looking to be in order, I moved on to the next one, which was a list of names of EVOs who had arrived in Latveria. One I always look at if nothing else, to see if I recognize the names of anyone mentioned in the comics. The list I'm currently looking at containing 3 such names: Lorna Dane, Alex Summers, and finally Scott Summers. Meaning I now have Polaris, Havoc, and Cyclops on my side. Nice. Especially with regard to Lorna, since she has the potential to become as powerful as her dear magnetic daddy Magneto. Though Alex and Scott are no pushovers either. Oh, and speaking of Scott, I saw a notation by his name, saying that he had to have some telepathic suggestions rooted deep in his subconscious removed during his checkup. I'll give you one guess who put them there. It looks like that bastard Sinister does exist in this reality, and if that's the case, then it probably means Apocalypse is more in line with his comic book version than his live-action version. Though I would like proper confirmation of that. Well, I can always ask Sinister before I put him on the ground, permanently. Since that biological butcher has to die. Not just for all the lives he's already taken, but for all the things he's done to Scott. All simply because he wanted him and Jean Grey to jump like rabbits and produce a kid that could take down the Apocalypse for him. Since he's too much of a sissy to find a way to do it with his own hands. Pathetic. Oh, and speaking of Jean Grey, it seems Xavier has already recruited her. So that likely means she and Scott won't get together. But you ever know. And speaking of couples, I'm curious to see who Lorna will end up with. Given that both Havoc and Marco Diaz exist here. I mean, I know I shouldn't be wondering about the love life of kids, but as a die-hard shipper I can't control myself. Especially around people who were the subjects of my favorite ships in my previous life. Anyway, after reviewing the list of new EVO arrivals, I began checking to see who was requesting access to my country. By that I mean who was requesting travel permission from other parts of the world to Latveria. Because ever since I took over, that shit is basically non-existent. Since I am not yet ready to reveal the new and improved Latveria to the entire world. Something a few bastards don't understand, since they continually keep trying to sneak a peek at my goodies. The biggest one's S.H.I.E.L.D., and HYDRA. The elements of it not tied and hiding within S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, after Latveria has so easily fended off all their information-gathering attempts, you'd think both organizations would take a hint. But no. They just keep at it. Which is starting to annoy me. Perhaps it's time I had a friendly chat with Fury. Food for thought. But back to my main point. As I looked to see who wanted to come to Latveria, I became shocked when I saw 2 names and pictures, which belonged to Irene Adler aka Destiny, and a young girl named Anna Marie, who is more commonly known as Rogue. Leaning in, I examined their pictures just to be sure if it was them, and my eyes weren't deceiving me. I also noted both Irene and Rogue look exactly like they did in X-Men Evolution. So that means this universe has Goth Rogue. Yes. Don't get me wrong. Regular Rogue is great. But as someone who grew up watching X-Men Evolution, Goth Rogue really does it for me. In fact, that's why my first girlfriend in my previous life was a goth chick. Good times. Though I do wonder why the 2 of them want to come Latveria in the first place. Especially without Mystique. I also wonder if Irene is actually Nightcrawler biological mothers here, like in the comics. Given they retconned his origins before I died in my previous life. Which I still find a little bit strange, but whatever. Regardless, I approved Irene and Rogue's travel plans to Latveria. Since I can't simply let such 2 immensely important characters slip through my fingers. Rogue in particular. Oh, I wonder if we'll get to see Scott x Goth Rogue here. My shipping juices are flowing now. Having approved the mother/daughter travel plans, I moved on to the last, and definitely the most important report in my opinion. The fates of Tony Stark and Yo Hinson. As I read the report, I saw both were in stable condition before being handed off to the US military. I nodded at this, having expected nothing less from the Spartans I sent to save them. Yeah, I said Spartans. After returning from New York, I began awakening them and indicating them into Latveria as a whole. I also introduced the Primarchs. Naturally, my people were a bit frightened of all of them at first. But during this past month, the tension has eased immensely. Since other than been genetically engineered superhuman warriors programmed to serve me, even at the cost of their own lives, the Primarchs and Spartans at their cores are just like everybody else. They have their own emotions, wants, and desires, hobbies, etc. Like I keep saying, if I had simply wanted a cold and efficient army, I would have stuck with Doombot's production. But I don't. I want the best, and things made of flesh and blood generally are in most cases. Closing out the reports, I leaned back in my chair, until I noticed Logan emailed me, which he never does, meaning whatever he wanted was important. So I opened the email he sent me, and found he was trying to set a meeting between myself and Professor Charles Xavier, which I have been expecting, especially since I've been deliberately recruiting EVOs he's been observing. I wanted to get the man's attention, but also test how strong his powers truly were. And this email on front of me gives me my answer. Even with Cerebro, Charles' powers aren't strong enough to penetrate the telepathic blanket I've placed over all of Latveria, which simply puts out false telepathic signatures, making my country seem completely normal to any outside telepathic observer. Moving on. I moved to reply to Logan's email, only to stop when Brainiac suddenly spoke up. "My Emperor, we've got a code red," he told me. When he did, I got utterly and completely serious. Since a code red means a situation where the entirety of Latveria itself is under threat. What's the situation? I asked Brainiac. Our satellite scans have picked up a massive distortion within the electromagnetic spectrum heading straight for Latveria from the northeast. Can you get me images of this distortion? I asked. Yes. They are coming through now, actually. Brainiac replied. Right after he did, several real-time images appeared on my holographic screen, showcasing the master of magnetism himself, Magneto, flying through the air right towards my country in one of his magnetic force fields, while right behind him floated several other magnetic force fields, each of them filled with people, some of whom I recognized. Amelia Vought, the psychopath who would literally suck Magneto's schlong if he asked him to, Fabian Cortez. Then finally Exodus. Yet another reason to suggest the apocalypse that will appear here will be more in line with the comics. But disregarding that, for now it's clear what's happening. Magneto and his forces means to launch an attack against my country, most likely due to the EVOs we've been bringing in. To think they would locate us so quickly. I mean, I expected Magneto to eventually, since I wanted to chat with him and I thought this would be the quickest way. But never this fast. It's my mistake this time. But that will be the only one. Brainiac, take the entire country to red alert status. Move all Doombots out of the direction Magneto is traveling, and inform the Primarchs and a contingent of Spartans to join me at this location. I ordered, giving Brainiac a specific location. Yes, my Emperor. Brainiac replied. Once he did, I summoned my armor and cracked my neck. More than ready to show Magneto and his followers when you trespass in my country. Third person, POV. Coming to a stop in the air, Magneto also stopped the force field containing his followers, since there was an obstruction blocking their path. Specifically people. The people in question being Victor in his armor, his Primarchs, and several squadrons of Spartans. Who are you? Magneto asked them. I am Dr. Doom, the ruler of this nation, of which you and your people are now trespassing in. Victor replied. Now you have two choices before you. Stand down and surrender or face the prospect of death. Make your choice. You would give me orders, dictator? Magneto shouted. I am no dictator but an emperor, and you are in my domain now. So again, make your choice, Magneto. Victor replied. You know of me. Good. Magneto said. Then it seems introductions are not required. Now hear me, Doom. Return my brethren you have taken, or we will take them back by force. I see. Victor replied. So you have chosen death. He said. Very well. Moving Victor was before Magneto before he could blink. Once he suckered punched the man, kicking off their battle.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.